Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Psychology, 4th edition, Chapter 2, narrated by Omar Mohsen Ibrahim Fouad. The time now is 11:35 p.m. Today is Wednesday, May 20th, 2026. Chapter 2, Biology and Behavior. Chapter Outline and Learning Objectives. Introducing the Brain. LO1, define neuroscience and biological psychology and explain how they contribute to our understanding of behavior. LO2, compare and contrast tools scientists use to study the brain, neurons, and neural communication. LO3, label the parts of a neuron and describe an action potential. LO4, illustrate how neurons communicate with each other. LO5, identify specific neurotransmitters and summarize how their activity affects human behavior. The brain can't do it alone. LO6, explain how the central and peripheral nervous systems connect. LO7, describe the organization and function of the peripheral nervous system. LO8, summarize how the endocrine system influences behavior and psychological processes. The amazing brain. LO9, describe the two brain hemispheres and how they communicate. LO10, define lateralization and explain what the split brain experiments reveal about the right and left hemispheres. LO11, identify areas in the brain responsible for language production and comprehension. LO12, define neuroplasticity and recognize when it is evident in the brain. LO13, identify the lobes of the cortex and explain their functions. LO14, describe the association areas and identify their functions. Let's dig a little deeper. LO15, distinguish the structures and functions of the limbic system. LO16, distinguish the structures and functions of the brainstem and cerebellum. Introducing the brain. In the line of fire, it was November 9th, 2004, and U.S. Marine Brandon Burns was surrounded by gunfire. The enemy was everywhere in the buildings, streets, and alleyways of Fallujah. I was in the deepest part of the city, and there was chaos, remembers Brandon at age 19. Brandon was on the front lines in the Iraq War, fighting in the Battle of Fallujah. Sent to the front lines, Brandon Burns poses for a photo at the Marine Corps Recruit Depot in Parris Island, South Carolina, in the fall of 2003, on the left. The following year, he found himself engaged in some of the most rigorous urban combat of the Iraq War, Filkins 2004. I was on top of the Humvee automatic grenade launcher shooting round after round, Brandon recalls. Suddenly there was darkness. A bullet from an enemy sniper had pierced Brandon's helmet and skull and ricocheted through the back left of his brain. Bleeding and unconscious, Brandon was rushed to bleeding and unconscious. Brandon was rushed from Fallujah to Baghdad. Medics had to resuscitate him on 5 separate occasions during the ambulance ride. As Brandon explains, 5 times I died. From Baghdad, Brandon was transferred to a hospital in Germany. Doctors concluded that some parts of his brain were no longer viable. They removed part of my skull and dug out the injured part of my brain. And now, Brandon says, 1/3 of my brain is gone. Note, quotations attributed to Brandon Burns, Laura Burns, and Christina Sandhouse are personal communications. A complex communication network. Imagine you were Brandon and lost a sizable chunk of your brain. How would it impact your life? Would you be the same person as before? Your brain houses your thoughts, emotions, and personality, and orchestrates your behavior. It files away all your memories and dark secrets, and is involved in your every move, from the beat of your heart to the blink of your eye. As scientists have noted, the human brain can be viewed as a system of unparalleled complexity. Reitman, ETAL 2020, page 1. This squishy pinkish organ is the most important component of the nervous system, a communication network that uses electrical and chemical processes to convey messages throughout your body. In this chapter, you will learn all about the human nervous system, which includes the brain, spinal cord, and nerves. The building blocks of the nervous system are neurons, specialized cells that communicate with each other through electrical and chemical signals. The brain is home to approximately 100 billion neurons. Huang and Luo, 2015, Lake ETAL 2018, and since a typical neuron can communicate with thousands of others, the total number of links among them could be about 100 trillion, 10 to the 14th power, or perhaps even a quadrillion, 10 to the 15th power. Ascoli, 2015, Huang and Luo, 2015. This intricate, ever-adapting web of neural connections gives us the power to think and feel in ways that are different from and vastly more complex than the thinking and feeling capacities of most other organisms. Consider the many tasks your brain is juggling at this very moment. As you can scan words on this page, your brain helps control the tiny muscles moving your eyes back and forth, as well as the larger muscles in your neck and torso that keep you sitting upright. Light-sensitive cells in the back of your eyes relay signals to various brain regions that transform the black marks on this page into words, sentences, and ideas for you to remember. And all the while, your brain is processing sounds and smells and working with other nerve cells in your body to make sure your heart keeps pumping, your lungs keep breathing, and your glands and organs keep releasing hormones properly. From bumps to brain scans, LO1 define neuroscience and biological psychology and explain how they contribute to our understanding of behavior. Brandon's injury resulted in a significant loss of his brain tissue. Remarkably, not only did he survive, but he can still talk about what occurred, think about the events, and feel emotions associated with the experience. How exactly does his brain orchestrate all these complex functions, especially after severe trauma? And how does a non-injured brain carry out these processes? Scientists have developed a decent understanding of how individual brain cells communicate with each other, but they have yet to provide definitive answers to big questions involving the brain and other parts of the nervous system, such as what is consciousness and how are memories stored. This is why the brain may be regarded as the last frontier of scientific inquiry. Huang and Luo, 2015, page 44. Neuroscience, the study of the brain and other parts of the nervous system, draws upon disciplines as diverse as medicine, engineering, computer science, and our personal favorite, psychology. The subfield of psychology concerned with understanding how the brain and other biological systems influence human behavior is called biological psychology, which brings us to the goal of this chapter, to examine how biology influences our behavior. LO2, compare and contrast tools scientists use to study the brain. Brandon underwent many brain scans before and after his surgeries, which allowed doctors to get a detailed look inside his head without lifting a scalpel. But had Brandon lived in a different era, brain scans would not have been an option. Before there were technologies to study the brain, people could only speculate about what was going on beneath the skull of a living person. One theory was that bumps on the skull revealed a person's characteristics. Judging the topography of the head was a core part of phrenology, the now discredited brain science that achieved enormous popularity at the beginning of the 19th century through its founder, German neuroanatomist Franz Joseph Gall, 1757 through 1828. Another early approach to studying the brain was through ablation, a technique used by French physiologist Pierre Fleurens, 1794 through 1867. Ablation involves destroying parts of a living animal's brain and then determining whether some functioning was lost thereafter. Scientists also learned about the brain by studying people with existing brain damage. Despite their limitations, these early methodologies advanced the idea that areas of the brain might have particular functions. Elling and Finger, 2019, Wickens, 2015. The notion that specific brain regions are in charge of certain activities is known as localization of function. Connections. If phrenology were practiced today, we would consider it a pseudoscience or an activity that resembles science but is not supported by objective evidence. Chapter 0 explains pseudoscience and critical thinking in more detail. Extended description for all in your head. All in your head. Are you a secretive person? How high is your self-esteem? The answers to these questions lie on the surface of the skull, or so claimed 19th century phrenologists, such as the one depicted in this 1886 illustration on the right. The phrenological map on the left shows the locations of brain organs thought to be responsible for various psychological traits. In addition to lacking scientific validity, this pseudoscience was used to justify racism and slavery. Baker, 2021, page 119. Brain research has come a long way since the days of Gall and Florenz. Recent decades have witnessed an explosion of technologies for studying the nervous system. Infographic 2.1. Such advances have made it possible to observe the brain as it solves problems, sleeps, listens to stories, virtually any activity you can imagine. Becker, ETAL 2020A. DeMiro, ETAL 2019, Shane, ETAL 2020. With emerging technologies such as optogenetics, researchers can activate or deactivate individual neurons or groups of neurons and observe how it affects animals' behavior. Daceroth, 2015, Gudsiet, ETAL 2020, Consciousness Chapter. Technology has even been used to test the claims of phrenologists, finding no evidence supporting the notion that the shape of the skull can be used to pinpoint mental abilities. Jones, et al. 2018. Now that we have learned how scientists study the brain, let's familiarize ourselves with some basic knowledge they have acquired. COVID in the brain. The image above shows the parahippocampal gyrus, one of the brain regions that may be altered after infection with the novel coronavirus, SARS-CoV-19. In addition to identifying structural changes in the brains of people who have had COVID-19, scientists have found evidence of short-term cognitive decline. Daoud et al. 2022. Does this mean that COVID-19 can have a long-term impact on brain structure and function? Future research should give us answers. Infographic 2.1 Ways to Study the Living Brain. Infographic 2.1 Ways to Study the Living Brain. In the past, scientists were limited in their ability to study the brain. Most of what they learned came from performing surgeries, often on cadavers. Today, imaging and recording technologies enable us to investigate the structure and function of the living brain. CT and MRI techniques provide static pictures of brain structures, while functional imaging and recording techniques allows us to observe the relationship between brain activity and specific mental functions. Functional technologies can also be used to diagnose injuries and diseases earlier than techniques that look at structure. New technologies are continually being developed, allowing us to study the brain in ways we couldn't imagine just a few years ago. Looking at brain structure, CT, computed tomography. Using X-rays, a scanner creates multiple cross-sectional images of the brain. Here the brain is shown from the top at the level of the ventricles, which form the butterfly-shaped dark spaces in the center. Magnetic resonance imaging, MRI. An MRI machine's powerful magnets create a magnetic field that passes through the brain. A computer analyzes the electromagnetic response, creating cross-sectional images similar to those produced by CT, but with superior detail. Electroencephalogram. Watching brain function, EEG, electroencephalogram. Electrodes placed on the scalp record electrical activity from the area directly below. When the recorded traces are lined up, as shown here, we can observe the scope a functional response across the brain's outer layer. PET, positron emission tomography. A radioactively labeled substance called a tracer is injected into the bloodstream and tracked while the participant performs a task. A computer then creates 3D images showing degrees of brain activity. Areas with the most activity appear in red. fMRI, functional magnetic resonance imaging. The flow of oxygen-rich blood increases to areas of the brain that are active during a task. fMRI uses powerful magnets to track changes in blood oxygen levels, like PET, positron emission tomography. This produces measurements of activity throughout the brain. Extended description for infographic 2.1 Ways to study the living brain. Show what you know. 1. Match the technology on the left with its characteristic on the right. Positron emission tomography creates cross-sectional images using X-rays. B. Electroencephalogram records electrical activity from the brain. C. Magnetic resonance imaging tracks changes of radioactive substances. D. Computerized axial tomography tracks changes in blood oxygen levels. E. Functional magnetic resonance imaging creates cross-sectional images with the help of magnetic fields. D. Creates cross-sectional images using X-rays. B. Records electrical activity from cortical area. A. Tracks changes of radioactive substances. E. Tracks changes in blood oxygen levels. C. Creates cross-sectional images with the help of magnetic fields. 2. A researcher studying the impact of Brandon's brain injury might work in the field of blank, or the study of the brain and other parts of the nervous system. Neuroscience. A researcher studying the impact of Brandon's brain injury might work in the field of neuroscience, or the study of the brain and other parts of the nervous system. Neurons and neural communication. The awakening. 2 weeks after the shooting, Brandon finally awoke from his coma. He could not move or feel the right side of his body, and he had lost the ability to use language. There were so many things he wanted to say to his family, but when he opened his mouth, the only sound that came out was ugh. Weeks went by before Brandon uttered his first word, no. That was all he could say for months, even when he really wanted to say yes. One-handed, Brandon ties his shoelaces with his left hand. His traumatic brain injury occurred on the left side of his body, causing paralysis and loss of sensation on the right side of his body. Apart from the paralysis to his right side and his difficulty with language, Brandon's other faculties appeared to be intact. He could remember people, places, and objects, and he reported no trouble hearing, smelling, or tasting. And although Brandon was not as outgoing and self-assured as before, he hadn't changed much overall. What was occurring in Brandon's nervous system that enabled him to function after such a serious injury? The same process that makes it possible for you to pick up your textbook, read these words, and decipher their meaning: communication between neurons. What do you really need to know about neurons? LO3. Label the parts of a neuron and describe an action potential. The structure of a typical neuron. A typical neuron has 3 basic parts: a cell body, dendrites, and an axon. Figure 2.1. The cell body of a neuron contains the standard components found in most human cells, including structures that nourish the cell and a nucleus containing genetic material. The Human Development chapter discusses this topic in more detail. Extending from the cell body are many dendrites. Dendrites, which are tiny branch-like fibers that receive messages from sending neurons. Also projecting from the cell body is a long, skinny, tube-like structure called an axon, which sends signals away from the cell body. A neuron usually has one axon with branches ending in axon terminals. It is through these axon terminals that messages are sent to other neurons. Many axons are surrounded by a myelin sheath, a fatty substance that insulates the activities occurring within, speeding the transmission of neural messages down the axon. In such cases, the axon is not entirely enclosed, but rather covered in segments of myelin. The breaks between the myelin segments are called nodes of Ranvier. The synapse is where the axon terminal of a sending neuron meets a dendrite of a neuron or other type of cell receiving its signal. Infographic 2.2. The tiny space separating them is called the synaptic gap, and it is only about 0.000127 millimeters wide. For comparison, a single sheet of printer paper is 0.1 millimeter thick, the equivalent of about 788 synaptic gaps combined. The equivalent of about 788 synaptic gaps combined. Connections. In Chapter 1, we discussed deoxyribonucleic acid, DNA, which is the genetic material we inherit from our parents. Here we note that genetic material is present in the cell body of a neuron. cell body. Dendrites receive messages. Axon sends messages from cell body to axon terminals. Nodes of Ranvier. Myelin sheath speeds communication. Axon terminals transmit messages to other neurons. Extended description for Figure 2.1, the neuron. Figure 2.1, the neuron. The neuron, the basic building block of the nervous system, has three main components. 1, a cell body that contains vital cellular structures. 2, bushy dendrites that receive messages from neighboring neurons. And 3, a long, thin axon that sends messages to other neurons through its branch-like terminals. Infographic 2.2, communication within neurons. Neural communication involves different processes within and between neurons. In this infographic, we follow the electrical action that conveys messages within the neuron from one end to the other. Dendrites, neuron cell body, axon hill block, axon myelin sheath, node of Ranvier, axon terminals. 1. The neuron at rest. Before communication begins, the neuron is at rest. Closed channels in the cell membrane prevent some positive ions from entering the cell, and the voltage inside of the cell is slightly more negative than the voltage outside. At minus 70 MV, the cell is at its resting potential. 2. The action potential. This graph shows the characteristic electrical trace of the action potential. When the neuron is stimulated, positive ions enter the cell, making the axon less negative. A. When the charge reaches the threshold, minus 55 MV, an action potential is triggered. Positive ions flood the cell, quickly reversing the charge from negative to positive. B. Afterward, the cell is restored to resting potential. C. Three, action potential travels length of axon. The action potential occurring in one axon segment causes a voltage change in the next, initiating an entirely new action potential there. The action potential occurring in one axon segment causes a voltage change in the next, initiating an entirely new action potential there. This sequential action travels along the axon like a wave, carrying the message from the axon hillock to axon terminals. Node of Ranvier, axon myelin. Extended description for infographic 2.2, communication with neurons. Holding it together, glial cells. Holding it together, glial cells. Neurons transmit information up and down the body, and they need a little support and nurturing to get the job done. This is where the glial cells, glial, come into play. Glial cells hold neurons together and maintain the structure of the nervous system. Glia means glue in Greek. Some researchers believe glial cells far outnumber neurons. Jekyll and Demu, 2017. While others estimate their numbers to be approximately the same, Allen and Lyons, 2018. More research is needed to clear up this controversy. For many years, scientists believed that glial cells simply kept things together. But we now know they do much more. Allen and Lyons, 2018. Cicerp, ETAL, 2020. For example, after Brandon's injury, microglia cells defended his brain from infection and inflammation. Jekyll and Demu, 2017, Straight, 2000, and astrocyte cells restored the barrier between brain and blood. Berta, ETAL, 2016, Gruber, 2009. Astrocytes also support communication between neurons. Betik, ETAL, 2020, Duda, ETAL, 2018. Other types of glial cells, oligodendrocytes and Schwann cells, provide the myelin sheath enveloping the axons of some neurons. Perves, ETAL, 2018. Not just glue, a scanning electron micrograph shows neurons, green, and glia, orange. Glial cells play a multitude of roles in the nervous system, from supporting cell metabolism to facilitating faster communication among neurons. Given their all-important role, perhaps it is no surprise that these cells are involved when things go wrong. It is now known that all neurological diseases have some glial component. Afridi, ETAL, 2022, page 1. What language do neurons speak? Neurons are activated in response to other neurons, which can be stimulated by receptors attached to your skin, muscles, and other organs. The ongoing communication that occurs among groups of neurons underlies your every sensation, thought, emotion, and behavior. Neurons have unique properties that allow them to communicate with other cells. But what information do they convey? In essence, the message is simple. I have been activated. A neuron is surrounded by and filled with fluid containing ions, or particles that have an electrical charge. Infographic 2.2. Some ions have a negative charge, proton ions. Others are positively charged, sodium and potassium ions. Two processes direct the flow of positive, plus, and negative ions into and out of the cell. Diffusion and electrostatic pressure. Diffusion is the natural tendency of ions to spread out or disperse. Electrostatic pressure causes similarly charged ions to spread apart and oppositely charged ions to move toward each other like magnets. The concentrations of positively and negatively charged ions inside and outside of the cell determine the concentrations of positively and negatively charged ions inside and outside of the cell determine the potential difference, voltage between the inside and outside of most neurons. Imagine a long building with people standing inside and outside, all of them holding either a positive or negative sign. If we were to count up the total number of positives inside and outside the building, and do the same for the negatives, we could determine the overall difference. The difference in the sum of the positive and negative charges inside and outside of the neuron determines the voltage. A neuron is encased in a membrane that is selectively permeable, allowing only some of the ions to pass in and out of its channels. The membrane is impermeable to positive sodium ions and negative protein ions. It does not allow these ions to enter or exit. Although there are some positive ions inside the neuron, the concentration of sodium ions plus outside the cell is much greater than that inside. As a result, sodium ions on the outside are attracted to the membrane because of diffusion and electrostatic pressure. Positive sodium ions approach the membrane from the outside, and negative protein ions approach the membrane from the inside. They move because the opposite charges are attracted to each other. Resting potential. To summarize, here's what is going on when the neuron is not active. The negative protein ions are only on the inside of the cell, but they are attracted to the excess positive charge outside and move toward the membrane because the protein ions are too big to get through the membrane. The inside of the neuron is negatively charged. Infographic 2.2. An electrical potential is created by the difference in charge between the outside and the inside of the neuron. Resting potential represents the electrical potential of a neuron at rest, and its value is 70 millivolts MV. For comparison, the voltage of a AA battery is 1500 MV. But what does this have to do with neurons transmitting information? Let's find out what happens when a neuron stops resting and goes into action. Action potential. Remember, when a neuron is in its resting state, particles on the outside of the cell are being pulled toward the membrane and cannot move inside. If the neuron is stimulated by neighboring cells, channels in its membrane begin to open up. Starting at the dendrites, an influx of positive sodium ions at the beginning of the axon, known as the axon hillock, causes a change in the voltage going from minus 70 MV to the threshold potential minus 55 MV. This triggers the channels to open in that first segment of the axon, allowing an influx of more positive sodium ions. The voltage there rises rapidly, increasing from negative 55 millivolts to positive 30 millivolts. This spike in voltage, which passes through the axon of a neuron, is called an action potential. What happens after this sudden jump in voltage? Resting potential is reestablished in order to return the neuron to its natural state. This is partly accomplished by the activity of a protein pump that restores the concentrations of ions in and outside the cell. The neuron must reset. Solutions inside and outside this segment of the axon return to balance so that it is ready to do more work. We call this time the refractory period. Moving down the axon, the spike in voltage, followed by the return to resting potential, begins at the axon hillock and travels along the axon like a row of dominoes tumbling down. The action potential travels in only one direction. The action potential travels in only one direction, from axon hillock to axon terminals. Each action potential takes about 1 millisecond to complete. and a typical neuron can fire several hundred times per second. It's hard to comprehend, but the action potentials constantly occurring in billions of neurons are the basis for all of our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. Excitatory and inhibitory signals. What triggers a neuron to fire an action potential? Neighboring cells deliver chemical messages, prompting channels in the dendrites to open up and allow sodium ions into the cell. These sending cells can be neurons or other types of cells that communicate with neurons, but we will assume they are neurons for the sake of simplicity. If enough sending neurons signal the receiving neuron to pass along the message, their combined signal becomes excitatory, and the neuron fires. However, not all neighboring neurons send an excitatory signal. Some deliver an inhibitory signal, instructing the neuron not to fire. For an action potential to occur, excitatory signals must exceed inhibitory signals, and the difference between them has to meet the threshold potential of negative 55 millivolts. If enough positively charged ions enter the cell, the potential of the neuron reaches its threshold, or trigger point, and the cell fires. All or none. Action potentials are all or none. They either happen or they don't, and their strength remains the same regardless of the conditions. So how does a neuron convey the strength of a stimulus? By 1, firing more often, and 2, delivering its message to more neurons. Consider a loud scream and a quiet whisper. The loud scream is a stronger stimulus, so it causes more neurons to fire than the quiet whisper. The loud scream also prompts each neuron to fire more often. In summary, there is no such thing as a partial action potential or a strong or weak action potential. Role of the myelin sheath. The firing of a neuron is facilitated by the myelin sheath, which insulates and protects the tiny voltage changes occurring inside the axon. Myelin is a good insulator, but the axon is not covered with myelin at the nodes of Ranvier, as shown in the photograph below. The action potential appears to jump from node to node as opposed to traversing the entire axon in one continuous movement, and this accelerates the transmission of the signal. Unmyelinated axons have slower transmission speeds because the signal must make its way down the entire length of the axon. The speed of the action potential in an unmyelinated axon is approximately 1.1 to 4.5 miles per hour, while that in a myelinated neuron can reach 268 miles per hour, faster than a Formula One racing car. Perves et al. 2018, page 59. Myelination of axons starts early in life and relates to the development of a variety of cognitive abilities and motor skills. Krogstrud et al. 2018, Liebel and Diani 2018. As the human body grows, neural messages must travel greater distances, and myelination helps increase the efficiency of this communication. So fast. Action potentials may travel as fast as 268 miles per hour through a myelinated axon. Perves et al. 2018. Myelin is a fatty substance that envelopes and insulates the axon, facilitating faster transmission. The action potential skips over the segments of myelin, hopping from one node of Ranvier to the next. Note the small space in the center instead of traversing the entire length of the axon. Because of their light color, axons wrapped in myelin are referred to as white matter, and destruction of this brain tissue can have serious consequences. For example, the symptoms of Alzheimer's disease are associated with white matter damage. Levitt et al. 2020. The brain also contains gray matter consisting of neuron cell bodies, glial cells, and other components. Myelination damage from disease such as multiple sclerosis can lead to many symptoms, including fatigue, weakness, and problems with vision and muscle coordination. Brownlee et al. 2017, Crouch et al. 2020. Are concussions worse for women? Women playing the same sports as men are more likely to experience concussions. They also tend to have longer recovery times. Why is this the case? Some researchers suspect it has something to do with the axons of neurons, which form of the brain's white matter. Some researchers suspect it has something to do with the axons of neurons, which form the brain's white matter. Laboratory studies suggest that the axons of female mammals are more prone to damage than those of males. Sanderson, 2021. LO4 illustrate how neurons communicate with each other. Communication between neurons. Neurons communicate with each other via chemicals called neurotransmitters. Infographic 2.3. An action potential moves down the axon, eventually reaching the axon terminals. The action potential causes vesicles, small fluid-filled sacs, in the axon terminals to unload neurotransmitters into the synaptic gap. The majority of these neurotransmitters drift across the gap and come into contact with receptor sites of the receiving neuron's dendrites. Just as it takes the right key to unlock a door, the neurotransmitter must fit a corresponding receptor site to convey its message. And because there are many different neurotransmitters, there are also a variety of receptor sites. When the neurotransmitters latch onto the receptor's gates in the receiving neuron's membrane, gates in the receiving neuron's membrane fly open, ushering in positively charged ions and thus restarting the cycle of the action potential if the threshold is met. Infographic 2.3 Communication between neurons. Normal neurotransmission. 1. Action potential reaches axon terminals. 2. Action potential triggers vesicles to release neurotransmitters into synaptic gap. Sending neuron, neurotransmitters, synaptic gap, receptor sites, receiving neuron. Excess neurotransmitter being reabsorbed by the sending neuron. 3. Neurotransmitters bind to their matching receptor sites on receiving neurons' dendrite, causing positively charged particles to enter cell. 4. After binding, neurotransmitters are reabsorbed or diffuse out of synaptic gap. Messages travel within a neuron via electrical signals, but communication between neurons depends on the movement of chemicals. Neurotransmitters. Though they all work in the same way, there are many different types of neurotransmitters, each linked to unique effects on behavior. However, drugs and other substances known as agonists and antagonists can alter this process of communication between neurons by boosting or blocking normal neurotransmitter activity. Boost, block. Drugs and other substances can alter normal neurotransmission. Agonists boost normal neurotransmitter activity. Nicotine mimics acetylcholine and causes this same activation. More receptors are activated and more messages are sent. Agonists. Antagonists block normal neurotransmitter activity. Curare, the paralyzing poison used on blowgun darts, acts as an acetylcholine antagonist. It blocks acetylcholine receptors, preventing the neurotransmitter from activating them, so fewer messages are sent. Antagonists. Extended description for infographic 2.3, communication between neurons. What happens to the neurotransmitters once they have conveyed their message? Neurotransmitters that latched onto receptors may be reabsorbed by the sending axon terminal in a process known as reuptake. Those that are not reabsorbed may drift out of the synapse through diffusion. This is how the synapse is cleared of neurotransmitters in preparation for the next release of chemical messengers. How do neurotransmitters influence our behavior? LO5 identifies specific neurotransmitters and summarize how their activity affects human behavior. Researchers have identified approximately 100 different types of neurotransmitters, with many more yet to be discovered. Cleveland Clinic, 2022, March 14th. Neurotransmitters secreted by one neuron may influence the activity of neighboring neurons, which can affect the activity of muscles and organs, as well as the regulation of mood, appetite, arousal, and a variety of other functions. Table 2.1. Scientists have been studying neurotransmitters since the late 1800s. Wickens, 2015, trying to understand how these chemicals influence bodily functions and behaviors. Keep in mind, however, that there is no one-to-one correspondence between the secretion of a neurotransmitter and a specific behavior. Let's examine some specific neurotransmitters, starting with the first one discovered, acetylcholine. Acetylcholine is a neurotransmitter that relays messages from neurons to muscles, thus enabling movement. Anytime you move some part of your body, whether dancing your fingers across a keyboard or bouncing your head to a favorite song, you have in part acetylcholine to think. Too much acetylcholine leads to muscle spasms. Too little causes paralysis. Acetylcholine is also involved in memory. Low levels in the brain have been linked to Alzheimer's disease, which can lead to problems with memory, language, and thinking. Johannesson, ETAL, 2015. Sabri, ETAL, 2018. Normal acetylcholine activity can be disrupted by snake and black widow spider bites, as well as food poisoning. Rigatti, ETAL, 2015. Glutamate and GABA. Much of the communication within the nervous system involves two neurotransmitters, glutamate and GABA, short for gamma aminobutyric acid. Glutamate is an excitatory neurotransmitter, so its main job is to kick neurons into action. make them fire, whereas GABA is inhibitory. It puts the brakes on firing. Glutamate influences most cells in the brain. It is absolutely critical for everything we do. So glutamate dysfunction can have a variety of effects. Dolka 2020, Para 1. For example, overactivity of this neurotransmitter is associated with strokes. Campos, ETAL 2011. Kana, ETAL 2015. While underactivity is theorized to be involved in some of the symptoms of schizophrenia. Katz, ETAL 2016. Madeira, ETAL 2018. As an inhibitory neurotransmitter, GABA plays a role in controlling sleep and wakefulness. Venini, ETAL 2012, as well as behaviors associated with fear and anxiety. Bata, ETAL 2015. Fazesi and Baines 2015. Norepinephrine has a variety of effects, but one of its most important functions is to help prepare the body for stressful situations. In the brain, norepinephrine is involved in regulating arousal and sleep. Mitchell and Wineshaker, 2010, Moore and Depew, 2016. This neurotransmitter plays an important role in maintaining attention, but in some situations, high levels could lead to overarousal and hypervigilance, which could dramatically interfere with thinking and attention. Moore and Depew, 2016. Serotonin. Serotonin helps control appetite, aggression, and mood, and regulates sleep and breathing. Atypical serotonin activity is thought to be one of the factors driving depression. Moore and Depew, 2016. Antidepressants called selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, SSRIs, including Prozac and Zoloft, boost the effects of this neurotransmitter. Treating of Psychological Disorders chapter. Normally, neurotransmitters that do not connect with receptor sites can be reabsorbed by the sending axon terminal in the reuptake process. SSRIs work to prevent this reabsorption. The longer serotonin is in the synapse, the more time it has to attach to a receptor and exert its effects. Endorphins. Endorphins are a group of naturally produced opioids. The consciousness chapter describes opioid drugs in more detail that regulate the secretion of other neurotransmitters. The term endorphin is derived from the words indigenous, meaning created within, and morphine. Released in response to pain, endorphins block pain receptors sites. Released in response to pain, endorphins block pain receptor sites. Brisk exercise increases their production, reducing the experience of pain and elevating mood. Harvard Health, 2020. Dopamine. Dopamine plays a key role in attention, learning through rewards, and regulation of body movements. The neurotransmitter has been implicated in the abuse of certain substances, including stimulants like cocaine and amphetamines. Nutt, ETAL, 2015. Siciliano, ETAL, 2018. Repeated use of some drugs overstimulates and impairs functioning of the neurons in the brain's pleasure circuit, theoretically making it more difficult to enjoy non-drug related activities. Dopamine and Parkinson's disease. Actor Michael J. Fox on the left and boxing legend Muhammad Ali greet each other at a red carpet event. Fox and Ali who passed away in 2016, are perhaps the most famous people to be diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, an incurable disorder that causes shaking, resting tremor, and slow and stiff movements. Parkinson's disease is linked to deterioration of neurons that produce dopamine. Parmar et al. 2020. Didn't see that coming? Dopamine on the brain. The early stages of love tend to be intense. You feel energized and elated as the relationship develops, and then crestfallen if something goes wrong. Thoughts of your loved one occupy your mind, perhaps to the point of obsession, and you may fail to notice red flags. Fisher et al. 2006. What's happening in the brain as you ride this roller coaster of love? Neuroimaging research tells us that dopamine plays an important part. Takahashi et al. 2015. Areas of the brain where dopamine is active, including the ventral tegmental area VTA and parts of the caudate nucleus, become excited when newly in love individuals look at pictures of their partners. Aaron et al. 2005. These regions play an essential role in our reward pathway. Sue and Tart Zelvin, 2017, Para 2, and their activity has also been associated with romantic love in couples that say they are still madly in love after decades. Acevedo, et al. 2012, page 146. Another brain chemical involved in the early stages of romantic love and social bonding in general is oxytocin. Omar et al. 2016. Oxytocin can behave as both a neurotransmitter and a hormone, and its activity has been associated with complex romantic bonds and feelings of love. Carter, 2022, Quintana and Gustella, 2020, page 519, Wu, 2020. In the first months of a relationship, oxytocin levels are high, and during times of bonding, oxytocin seems to increase alongside chemicals involved in experiences of reward and stress. Perhaps this is no surprise, as the euphoria experienced during the period of falling in love goes hand in hand with increased stress, reflecting the risk for the loss of the relationship. Ulmer, Yaniv, et al. 2016, page 136. Table 2.1, Neurotransmitters. You may be surprised about these 5. Neurotransmitter function, did you know? Neurotransmitter. Acetylcholine function, muscle movement, memory, arousal, attention. Did you know the anti-wrinkle treatment Botox paralyzes the facial muscles by preventing activity of acetylcholine, which would normally enable muscle movement? Nichols, 2020. Neurotransmitter dopamine. Its function, coordination of muscle movement, attention, pleasure. Did you know the same dopamine circuits involved in drug addiction may also be implicated in overheating and food addiction? Kanchi et al. 2021. D. Phyllis Antonio and Small, 2019. GABA inhibits communication between neurons. Anti-anxiety drugs such as Valium and Xanax work by enhancing the effects of GABA. Drexler et al. 2013. Massilius et al. 2019. Glutamate promotes communication between neurons. Glutamate is a close chemical relative to the savory food additive, monosodium glutamate, or MSG. Some people believe that consuming MSG causes brain damage, but such claims are not supported by solid scientific data. Hamzalu, 2015. Serotonin, mood, appetite, aggression, sleep. Physical exercise may boost serotonin activity in the brain, leading to improved mood and decreased symptoms of depression. APA 2020. March 4th. Watson 2021. Every thought, behavior, and emotion you have ever experienced can be traced to neurotransmitter activity in the nervous system. Listed here are some surprising facts about common neurotransmitters. Agonists and antagonists. Drugs and other substances influence behavior by interfering at the level of the synapse. Chapters on consciousness and treatment of psychological disorders. Certain substances mimic neurotransmitters, while others block neurotransmitter action. Agonists increase the normal activity of a neurotransmitter, whether its signal is excitatory or inhibitory, and antagonists reduce the effects of a neurotransmitter or block its release. Infographic 2.3. For example, muscarine, found in poisonous mushrooms, increases the secretion of acetylcholine, causing sweating, pupil constriction, nausea, and respiratory distress. Because these substances amplify the normal activity of acetylcholine, they are agonists. On the other hand, the popular anti-wrinkle treatment Botox is an antagonist because it blocks the release of acetylcholine, paralyzing the facial muscles so they can no longer wrinkle the overlying skin. Nichols, 2020. If you're searching for another example of an antagonist, look no further than your nearest coffee shop. Think critically. Where's my morning antagonist? Did you jumpstart your day with a cup of coffee, an energy drink, or a matcha latte? Caffeine perks you up at the crack of dawn, or jolts you from a mid-afternoon daze by manipulating your nervous system. One way caffeine works is by blocking the receptors for a neurotransmitter called adenosine. It is an adenosine antagonist. When adenosine latches onto receptors, it slows down their activity, making neurons less likely to fire. And this tends to make you feel drowsy. Caffeine resembles adenosine enough that it can dock onto the same receptors, posing as adenosine. With caffeine occupying its receptors, adenosine can no longer exert a sleep-inducing effect. Aguirre, ETAL 2020. Julian, ETAL 2023, page 135. The result: more neurons fire and you feel full of energy. Given the effects of caffeine, it's no wonder that the vast majority of college students, 92%, according to one study, consume it. Mahoney, ETAL 2019. The right dose of caffeine can help maintain reaction time, attentiveness, and reasoning skills even after several days. The right dose of caffeine can help maintain reaction time, attentiveness, and reasoning skills even after several days of reduced sleep. Kamimori, ETAL 2015. The effects of caffeine do not stop at the brain. As anyone who has enjoyed a double espresso can testify, caffeine kicks the body into high gear. Some research suggests it may enhance endurance during exercise. Aguirre ETAL 2020. And for coffee drinkers in particular, the good news keeps coming. Drinking this beverage has been associated with decreased risk of type 2 diabetes, Parkinson's disease, and certain types of cancer, and lower overall mortality. However, these effects may be attributed to other compounds found in coffee, not necessarily the caffeine. Grosso ETAL 2017, Loftfield ETAL 2018. As stimulating as these findings may be, they depict only part of a complex picture. Caffeine may also have undesirable effects. According to a review of 58 studies, using caffeine can make it harder to fall asleep, reduce total sleep time, and interfere with the deep stages of sleep that help you feel refreshed in the morning. Clark and Landolt, 2017. Yet, trying to cut back may lead to withdrawal symptoms such as headaches, sleepiness, and decreased concentration. Chawla, 2018, Consciousness Chapter. For some people, pregnant people, children, and those with certain health conditions, caffeine use should be limited or avoided entirely. Medline Plus, 2021. Now, sit back, relax, and sip on a beverage caffeinated or not. It's time to examine the nervous system running through your arms, legs, fingers, toes, and everywhere else. Show what you know. 1. Blank are released into the blank when an action potential reaches the axon terminal. A. Sodium ions, synaptic gap. B. Neurotransmitters, synaptic gap. C. Potassium ions, cell membrane. D. Neurotransmitters, sodium gates. The answer is B. Neurotransmitters, synaptic gap. Neurotransmitters are released into the synaptic gap when an action potential reaches the axon terminal. 2. Many axons are surrounded by a blank, which is a fatty substance that insulates the axon. The answer is myelin sheath. Many axons are surrounded by a myelin sheath, which is a fatty substance that insulates the axon. Question number 3. Describe how 3 neurotransmitters impact your daily behavior. Answers will vary. Refer to Table 2.1 for examples. The brain can't do it alone. Like any complex system, the brain needs a supporting infrastructure to carry out its directives and relay essential information from the outside world. Running up and down your spine and branching throughout your body are neurons that provide connections between your brain and the rest of you. As Figure 2.2 illustrates, the central nervous system, CNS, consists of the brain and spinal cord, while the peripheral nervous system, PNS, comprises all the neurons that are not in the central nervous system. The peripheral nervous system connects the central nervous system with the body's muscles, glands, and organs, and it can be divided into 2 branches, the somatic nervous system and the autonomic nervous system. Nervous system, central nervous system, CNS, brain, spinal cord. brain, spinal cord, peripheral nervous system, PNS, somatic nervous system, autonomic nervous system, sympathetic nervous system, parasympathetic nervous system, peripheral nervous system. Extended description for Figure 2.2, overview of the nervous system. Figure 2.2, overview of the nervous system. The nervous system is made up of the central nervous system, CNS, which includes the brain and spinal cord, and the peripheral nervous system, PNS, which connects the central nervous system to the rest of the body. The spinal cord and simple reflexes. Brandon experienced a devastating brain injury that temporarily immobilized half of his body. The paralysis could have affected his entire body if the bullet had pierced his spinal cord. This bundle of neurons allows communication between the brain and the peripheral nervous system. The spinal cord has two major responsibilities. One, receiving information from the body and sending it to the brain. And two, taking information from the brain and delivering it through the body. If this pathway is blocked, commands from the brain cannot reach the muscles responsible for making you walk, talk, and pour yourself a glass of orange juice. Likewise, the skin and other parts of the body have no pathway for communicating sensory information to the brain, like, ooh, that burn. Likewise, the skin and other parts of the body have no pathway for communicating sensory information to the brain, like, ooh, that burner is hot, or oh, this massage feels good. Breakthrough technology. Michael Riccati, shown here walking with a supportive device, was previously unable to move his legs. He is one of 3 study participants to use a newly configured spinal implant that delivers electrical impulses to neurons involved in movement. Wilson, 2022. Researchers who studied Riccati reported their incredible results in Nature Medicine. The participants could produce up to 300 independent steps as early as the first day of stimulation. Rowald, ETAL 2022, page 266. LO6, explain how the central and peripheral nervous systems connect. Types of neurons. How do the brain and spinal cord, which make up the central nervous system, communicate with the rest of the body through the peripheral nervous system? In essence, there are 3 types of neurons participating in this back and forth chatter. Sensory neurons receive information about the environment from the sensory systems and send it to the brain for processing. Motor neurons carry information from the central nervous system to various parts of the body, causing muscles to contract and glands to release chemicals. Interneurons, which reside exclusively in the brain and spinal cord, act as bridges connecting sensory and motor neurons. By gathering and processing sensory input from multiple neurons, interneurons facilitate the nervous system's most complex operations, from solving equations to creating lifelong memories. They are also involved in a relatively simple operation, the reflex. The reflex arc. Have you ever touched a burning hot pan? You probably withdrew your hand before you even had a chance to think about it. This ultra-fast response to a painful stimulus is known as a reflex, figure 2.3. Touching the hot pan activates a communication pathway that begins with the sensory neurons, travels through interneurons in the spinal cord, and ends with motor neurons that cause movement. Amazingly, the brain is not involved in this initial reaction. A sensory neuron has a rendezvous. A sensory neuron has a rendezvous with a sensory neuron has a rendezvous with an interneuron in the spinal cord, which then commands a motor neuron to react. No brain required. We refer to this process in which a stimulus causes an involuntary response as a reflex arc. One, heat activates sensory neurons. Two, sensory neurons carry information from environment to interneuron in spinal cord. Three, interneuron in spinal cord activates motor neuron. 4. Motor neuron excites muscle, initiating motion that pulls hand away. 5. Brain receives message. Spinal cord to brain. Extended description for Figure 2.3, the reflex arc. Figure 2.3, the reflex arc. Without any input from the brain, neurons in the spinal cord are capable of carrying out a simple reflex. While this reflex is occurring, sensory neurons also send messages to the brain, letting it know what has happened. Eventually, your brain does process the event, otherwise you would have no clue it happened. You become consciously aware of your reaction after it has occurred. My hand just pulled back. That pan was hot. Although many sensory and motor neurons are involved in this reaction, it happens very quickly, hopefully in time to reduce injury in cases when the reflex arc involves pain. Why do you think the reflex arc evolved? In other words, how might this behavior promote human survival over evolutionary time? The peripheral nervous system, LO7, describe the organization and function of the peripheral nervous system. The peripheral nervous system, PNS, includes all the neurons that are not in the central nervous system, Figure 2.2. These neurons are bundled together and act like electrical cables carrying signals from place to place. We call these collections of neurons nerves. Nerves of the peripheral nervous system inform the central nervous system about the body's environment. Both the exterior, for example, sights, sounds, and tastes, and the interior, for example, heart rate, blood pressure, and temperature. The central nervous system, in turn, makes sense of all this information and then responds by dispatching orders to the muscles, glands, and other tissues through the nerves of the peripheral nervous system. As mentioned earlier, the PNS has two functional branches, the somatic nervous system and the autonomic nervous system. The somatic nervous system includes sensory nerves and motor nerves. Somatic means related to the body. The sensory nerves gather information from sensory receptors in the skin and other tissues and send it to the central nervous system. This provides the brain with constant feedback about temperature, pressure, pain, and other sensory experiences. The motor nerves receive information from the central nervous system and relay it to the muscles. These nerves control the skeletal muscles that give rise to voluntary movements like picking up a pencil or climbing into bed. The autonomic nervous system. Meanwhile, the autonomic nervous system is working behind the scenes, regulating involuntary activities such as the pumping of the heart, the expansion and contraction of blood vessels, and digestion. Most of the behaviors supervised by the somatic nervous system are voluntary, within your conscious control and awareness, whereas processes directed by the autonomic nervous system tend to be involuntary, automatic and outside of your awareness. Just remember, autonomic controls the automatic. The autonomic nervous system has two divisions that help us respond to and recover from stressful or crisis situations. Figure 2.4. The sympathetic nervous system initiates what is often referred to as the fight or flight response, which prepares the body to deal with a crisis. When faced with a stressful situation, the sympathetic nervous system preps the body for action by increasing heart rate and respiration, and by slowing digestion and other maintenance functions. Earlier, we mentioned that caffeine makes you feel physically energized. This is because it activates the fight or flight response. Fluke, ETAL 2016. Sympathetic, parasympathetic, dilates pupils. Sympathetic dilates pupils, increases respiration, increases heart rate, slows digestion, energy diverted to muscles, increases blood flow to muscles. Parasympathetic constricts pupils, decreases respiration, lowers heart rate, activates digestive processes. Extended description for Figure 2.4, the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. Figure 2.4, the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems. The autonomic nervous system has two divisions, the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems. In a stressful situation, the sympathetic nervous system initiates the fight or flight response. The parasympathetic nervous system calms the body when the stressful situation is passed. The fight or flight response would certainly come in handy if fleeing predators were part of your day-to-day life, as it may have been for our primitive ancestors. But you probably are not chased by wild animals very often. You may, however, notice your heart race and your breathing rate increase during other types of anxiety-producing situations. Going on a first date, taking a test, or speaking in front of an audience. For these effects, you have your sympathetic nervous system to thank. Stress and health chapter. The parasympathetic nervous system, on the other hand, oversees the rest and digest process, which basically works to bring the body back to a non-crisis mode. When a crisis has ended, the parasympathetic system reverses the activity initiated by the sympathetic nervous. When a crisis has ended, the parasympathetic system reverses the activity initiated by the sympathetic system. For example, lowering heart rate and respiration, increasing digestion. The two systems work together, balancing the activities of these primarily involuntary processes. The parasympathetic and sympathetic systems allow us to fight if we need to, flee when necessary, and calm down when danger has passed. Think critically, tend and befriend. Fighting and running are not the only ways we respond to stress. Humans also have an inclination to tend and befriend in response to threatening situations, that is, direct energy toward nurturing offspring and forging social bonds. Von Dawins, ETAL 2012. Von Dawins, ETAL 2019. Historically, the tend and befriend reaction has been associated with females. Taylor, ETAL 2000. Other factors may better predict who will tend and befriend. Hillay, ETAL 2023. But research generally suggests that females are more inclined to respond in such a way. Taylor and Master 2011. This disparity could be partly explained by differences in nature. For example, males have the SRY gene, which drives the development of male sex characteristics. SRY is also expressed in brain and body tissues, where stress hormones are active, and it may work to amplify the fight or flight response in males. Lee and Harley, 2012. For more information on the biological differences between female and male brains, refer to the Cognition, Language, and Intelligence chapter. Men who tend and befriend. Rescuers help a baby arriving on the Greek island Lesbos in a refugee boat. During times of stress, both males and females may demonstrate the tend and befriend response, that is, direct their energy toward nurturing offspring and developing social relationships. Biology is important, but we must also remember that stress responses and all human behaviors result from a complex interplay of nature and nurture. Can you think of any environmental factors that might influence the way males deal with stress? In the United States and other Western cultures, teenage males may feel the need to develop a tough masculine image, like for example an alpha male, out of fear of being coined weak or being seen as inferior. Kirby and Kirby, 2017, page 74. Young males may withhold compassion and caring behaviors to avoid being rejected by peers. But we as a society have the power to resist this traditional view of masculinity. Researchers are exploring interventions aimed at increasing compassion, and the results are encouraging. Kirby and Kirby, 2017. What actions can you as an individual take to promote helping and nurturing behaviors among the males and females in your life? The endocrine system. Imagine that you are 19 years old. Imagine that you are 19-year-old Brandon Burns fighting in the Battle of Fallujah, one of the bloodiest battles of the Iraq War. The sound of gunfire rings through the air. Bullets zip past your helmet. People are dying around you. Your life could end at any moment. Unless you have been in a similar situation, it would be difficult to fathom how you would feel. But one thing seems certain. You would be feeling a great deal of stress. When faced with imminent danger, the sympathetic nervous system responds almost instantaneously. Activity in the brain triggers the release of neurotransmitters that cause increases in heart rate, breathing rate, and metabolism, changes that will come in handy if you need to flee or defend yourself. But the nervous system does not act alone. The endocrine system is also hard at work, releasing stress hormones such as cortisol, which prompt similar psychological changes. LO8 summarize how the endocrine system influences behavior and psychological processes. The endocrine system is a communication system that uses glands rather than neurons to send messages. Figure 2.5. The messages are conveyed by hormones, chemicals produced by the glands and released into the bloodstream. There are many types of hormones. Some promote aggression and mood swings. Others influence growth, alertness, cognition, and appetite. Like neurotransmitters, hormones are chemical messengers that affect many processes and behaviors. In fact, some chemicals, such as norepinephrine, can act as both neurotransmitters and hormones, depending on where they are released. neurotransmitters are unloaded into the synaptic gap between neurons, whereas hormones are secreted into the bloodstream by endocrine glands stationed around the body. Pineal gland, hypothalamus, pituitary gland, thyroid gland, adrenal gland, pancreas, ovaries, testes. Extended description for Figure 2.5, the endocrine system. Figure 2.5, the endocrine system. This system of glands secretes hormones directly into the bloodstream. This system of glands secretes hormones directly into the bloodstream. When neurotransmitters are released into a synaptic gap, their effects can be almost instantaneous. Hormones usually make long voyages to faraway targets by way of the bloodstream, creating a relatively delayed but usually longer-lasting impact. A neural impulse can travel over 250 miles per hour, much faster than messages sent via hormones, which take minutes, if not longer, to arrive where they are going. However, the messages sent via hormones are more widely spread because they are disseminated through the bloodstream. If the endocrine system had a chief executive officer, it would be the pituitary gland, a gland about the size of a pencil eraser, located in the center of the brain, just under the hypothalamus, a structure we will explore later. Controlled by the hypothalamus, the pituitary gland, also known as the master gland, influences all the other glands and promotes growth through the secretion of its hormones. The thyroid gland regulates the rate of metabolism by secreting thyroxine, and the adrenal glands are involved in the stress responses and maintenance of salt balance. Other endocrine glands and organs directed by the pituitary include the pineal gland, which secretes melatonin, controls sleep-wake cycles, the pancreas, which secretes insulin, regulates blood sugar, and the ovaries and testes, which secrete sex hormones, cause differences in male and female development. Together, these glands and organs can impact 1. Growth and sex characteristics, 2. Regulation of some basic body processes, and 3. Responses to emergencies. Just as our behaviors are influenced by neurotransmitters, we can't see, and action potentials we can't feel. The hormones secreted by the endocrine system are also hard at work behind the scenes. Now that we have discovered how information moves through the body via electrical and chemical signals, let's turn our attention toward the part of the nervous system that integrates this activity, creating a unified and meaningful experience. Time to explore the brain. Show what you know. 1. The blank regulates involuntary activity such as the pumping of the heart, the expansion and contraction of blood vessels, and digestion. A. Reflex arc. B. Spinal cord. C. Autonomic nervous system. D. Somatic nervous system. The answer is C. Autonomic nervous system. The autonomic nervous system regulates involuntary activity such as the pumping of the heart, the expansion and contraction of blood vessels, and digestion. 2. The blank gland located in the center of the blank. Question number 2. The blank gland located in the center of the brain, just under the hypothalamus, is in charge of the endocrine system. The answer is pituitary. The pituitary gland located in the center of the brain, just under the hypothalamus, is in charge of the endocrine system. 3. As you recall, Brandon's brain injury led to paralysis on the right side of his body. What do you think would happen if a doctor tapped on his right knee? Would he experience a reflex? Yes, Brandon would display a reflex. The knee jerk is an involuntary reaction carried out by neurons outside of the brain. The Amazing Brain. The Girl with Half a Brain. As Brandon Burns began his long journey to recovery, a 17-year-old girl in Bristol, Pennsylvania, was enjoying a particularly successful senior year of high school. Christina Sandhouse was an honor roll student for the 4th year in a row, and she had been named captain of the varsity bowling team. But these accomplishments did not come so easily. It took Christina twice as much time as classmates to do homework assignments because her brain needed extra time to process information. She had to invent a new bowling technique because the left side of her body was partially paralyzed. And she was constantly aware of being different from the other kids at school. Christina wasn't simply different from her classmates, however. She was extraordinary because she managed to do everything they did, and more, with nearly half of her brain missing. Christina's remarkable story began when she was 7 years old. She was a vibrant, healthy child who loved soccer and playing outside with her friends. Barring an occasional ear infection, she basically never got sick. That is until the day she had her first seizure. It was the summer of 1995, and Christina's family was vacationing on the Jersey Shore. While playing in a swimming pool with her cousins, Christina hopped onto the deck to chase a ball and noticed that something wasn't quite right. She looked down and saw her left ankle twitching uncontrollably. Her life was about to change dramatically. As the days and weeks wore on, the tremors in Christina's ankle moved up her left side and eventually spread through her. As the days and weeks wore on, the tremors in Christina's ankle moved up her left side and eventually spread throughout her body. In time, she was having seizures every 3 to 5 minutes. Doctors suspected she had Rasmussen's encephalitis, a rare disease that causes severe swelling in one side of the brain, impairing movement and thinking and sometimes causing debilitating seizures. AIETAL 2021, Varadkar ETAL 2014. Christina and her mother decided to seek treatment at the Johns Hopkins Hospital in Baltimore, the premier center for treating children with seizure disorders. They met with Dr. John Freeman, a pediatric neurologist and an expert in hemispherectomy, a surgery to remove nearly half of the brain. A rare and last resort operation, the hemispherectomy is only performed on patients experiencing severe seizures that can't be controlled in other ways. After examining Christina, Dr. Freeman made the same diagnosis, Rasmussen's encephalitis, and indicated that the seizures would get worse, and they would get worse fast. He recommended a hemispherectomy and told Christina and her mother to let him know when she had reached her limit with the seizures. Then they would go ahead with the operation. Staying strong, Christina Sandhouse relaxes with her mother at Johns Hopkins when she had a dramatic brain surgery known as hemispherectomy. Prior to the operation, Christina experienced hundreds of seizures a day. Why did Dr. Freeman recommend this drastic surgery to remove nearly half of Christina's brain? And what side of the brain did he suggest removing? Before addressing these important questions, we need to develop a general sense of the brain's geography. Video profile, Christina, in her own words. The two hemispheres, LO9 Describe the two brain hemispheres and how they communicate. Illustrations of the brain typically depict a walnut-shaped wrinkled structure. This is the cerebrum, Latin for brain, the largest and most conspicuous part of the brain. The cerebrum includes virtually all parts of the brain except the brain stem structures and the cerebellum, which you will learn about later. Like a walnut, the cerebrum has two distinct halves, or hemispheres. Observing the brain from above, a deep groove running from the front of the head to the back is visible, dividing it into the right cerebral hemisphere and the left cerebral hemisphere. The hemispheres may look like mirror images of one another, with similar structures on the left and right, but they are not perfectly symmetrical. And they don't have identical jobs. Linking the two hemispheres is a bundle of axons, nerve fibers, known as the corpus callosum. Corpus callosum. Corpus callosum. Through the corpus callosum, the left and right sides of the brain communicate and work together to process information. Generally speaking, the right hemisphere controls and processes sensations from the left side of the body, and the left hemisphere does the same for the right side of the body. This explains why Brandon, who was shot on the left side of his head, experienced paralysis and loss of sensation on the right half of his body. Christina's situation is roughly the opposite. Rasmussen's encephalitis struck the right side of her brain, which explains why her left ankle started twitching at the pool and why all her subsequent seizures affected the left side of her body. This is why Dr. Freeman recommended the removal of her right hemisphere. Two hemispheres. The cerebrum looks like a walnut with its two wrinkled halves. Christina makes the decision within 2 months. Christina's seizures were occurring every 3 minutes, hundreds of times a day. She was unable to play soccer or go outside during school recess, and she sat on a beanbag chair in class so she wouldn't hurt herself during a seizure. I couldn't do anything anymore, Christina says. I wasn't enjoying my life. In February 1996, the doctors at Johns Hopkins removed the right hemisphere of Christina's brain. The operation lasted some 14 hours. When Christina emerged from the marathon surgery, her head was pounding with pain. I remember screaming and asking for medicine, she recalls. The migraines persisted for months, but eventually tapered off, and ultimately the surgery served its purpose. Christina no longer experienced debilitating seizures. Pre-op. Christina is wheeled into the operating room for her 14-hour hemispherectomy. She had a seizure in the elevator on the way to the surgery. Extreme surgeries, removing nearly half of a brain, may sound barbaric, but hemispherectomies have proven to be effective for eliminating seizures, with success rates from multiple studies ranging from 54% to 90%. Liu, 2014, in a study from the Cleveland Clinic, 83% of hemispherectomy patients could walk independently nearly 13 years after surgery. Meanwhile, 70% possessed good spoken language skills, and 42% were able to read satisfactorily. Musa, ETAL 2013. Hemispherectomy. This scan shows the brain of a person who has undergone a hemispherectomy.
The green area, once occupied by the removed hemisphere, is now filled with cerebrospinal fluid. Hemispherectomies are only used for cases that do not respond to drugs and other interventions and are characterized by seizures originating in one hemisphere. Young ETAL 2020. Another less extreme last resort surgery for drug-resistant seizures is the split brain operation, which essentially disconnects the right and left hemispheres. Normally, the two hemispheres communicate through the corpus callosum, but this same band of nerve fibers can also serve as a passageway for the electrical storms responsible for seizures. With the split brain operation, the corpus callosum is severed so that these storms can no longer pass freely between the hemispheres. Woolman, 2012. LO10. Define lateralization and explain what the split brain experiments reveal about the right and left hemispheres. Studying the split brain, in addition to helping many patients with severe drug-resistant epilepsy, split brain operations have provided researchers with an excellent opportunity to explore the specialization of the hemispheres. D. Han, ETAL 2020. Before we examine this research, you need to understand how visual information is processed. Each eye receives visual sensations, but that information is sent to the opposite hemisphere and shared between the hemispheres via the corpus callosum. Specifically, information presented in the right visual field is processed in the left hemisphere, and information presented in the left visual field is processed in the right hemisphere. Equipped with knowledge, U.S. neuropsychologist Roger Sperry, 1913 through 1994, and his student Michael Gazzaniga conducted groundbreaking research on epilepsy patients who had undergone split brain operations to alleviate their seizures. Not only did Sperry and Gazzaniga's split brain participants experience fewer seizures, they had surprisingly normal cognitive abilities and showed no obvious changes in temperament, personality, or general intelligence. As a result of their surgeries, Gazzaniga, 1967, page 24. But under certain circumstances, the researchers observed they behaved as though they had two separate brains. Gazzaniga, 1967, 1998, 2005, figure 2.6. Touch the object matching on the screen. I see an apple. Information presented in right visual field is sent to the left hemisphere, where language processing occurs. Participant can speak the answer. I don't see it. Information presented in left visual field is sent to the right hemisphere. Participant can't use language to say what they were shown. The participant can touch the correct object, even if they can't say what has been projected in their left visual field. The participant uses their left hand, which is controlled by the right hemisphere, where the visual information has been processed. Extended description for figure 2.6, the split brain experiment. Figure 2.6, the split brain experiment. An example of a split brain experiment is shown here. Because the hemispheres are disconnected through the surgery, researchers can study each hemisphere separately to explore its unique capabilities or specializations. Imagine that researchers flashed an image, let's say an apple, on the right side of a screen, ensuring that it would be processed by the brain's left hemispheres. The split brain participant could articulate what they had seen. I saw an apple. If, however, the apple appeared on the left side of the screen, processed by the right hemisphere, they would claim they saw nothing. But when asked to identify the image in a nonverbal way, pointing or touching with their left hand, they could do this without a problem. This proved they could actually see the apple. They just couldn't put it into words. Gazzaniga, 1967, 1998. Lateralization. The split brain experiments offered an elegant demonstration of lateralization, the tendency for the left and right hemispheres to excel in certain activities. When images are flashed in the right visual field, the information is sent to the left side of the brain, which excels in language processing. This explains why the split brain participants were able to articulate the image they had seen on the right side of the screen. Images appearing in the left visual field are sent to the right side of the brain, which excels at visual spatial tasks, but is generally not responsible for processing language. Thus, the participants were tongue-tied when asked to report what they had seen on the left side of the screen. They could, however, reach out and point to it using their left hand, which is controlled by the right hemisphere. Gazzaniga, 1998. Gazzaniga, ETAL, 1965. These split brain studies revealed that the left hemisphere plays a crucial role in language processing and the right hemisphere in managing visual spatial tasks. These are only generalizations, however. While there are clear differences in the way the hemispheres process information and the speed at which they do it, they can also process the same types of information. In a split brain individual, communication between the hemispheres is limited. This is not the case for someone with an intact corpus callosum. The hemispheres are constantly integrating and sharing all types of information. Lilienfeld, ETAL 2010, Pinto, ETAL 2017. Next time you hear someone claim that certain personality and cognitive characteristics are associated with being left-brained or right-brained, ask them to identify research to back it up. Nielsen, ETAL 2013, Schmerling, 2017. There is no evidence for this strict dividing line between right and left brain activities. Similarly, beware of catchy sales pitches for products designed to increase your logical and Similarly, beware of catchy sales pitches for products designed to increase your logical and analytical left brain reasoning or to help you tap into your creative right brain. Staub, 2016. This way of thinking is oversimplified. Keep this in mind while reading the upcoming sections on specialization in the left and right sides of the brain. The two hemispheres may have certain areas of expertise, but they work as a team to create your experience of the world. Speak again. Brandon works on his pronunciation in front of a mirror during a speech therapy session at the Memphis VA hospital. The extent of his injury on the left side of his head is visible. Upon awakening from his coma, Brandon could not articulate a single word. Today, he can hold his own in complex conversations. Roles of the left and right. Armed with this new knowledge of the split brain experiments, let's return our focus to Brandon. His injury occurred on the left side of the brain, devastating his ability to use language. Before the Battle of Fallujah, Brandon had breezed through Western novels at breakneck speeds. After his injury, even the simplest sentence baffled him. Words on a page looked like nothing more than black lines and curls. Brandon remembers, it was like a puzzle that I couldn't figure out. Brandon's difficulties with language are fairly typical for someone with an injury to the left hemisphere, because regions on the left side of the brain tend to predominate in language. This is not true for everyone, however. The left hemisphere handles language processing in around 95% to 99% of people who are right-handed, but only in about 70% of those who are left-handed. Corballis, 2014. About 1 in 10 people are strongly left-handed, and these people are less likely to have language dominance in the left hemisphere. Papa de Tu, Past 2, ETAL 2020. LO11, identify areas in the brain responsible for language production and comprehension. Language production and comprehension. Language production and comprehension. Evidence for the language on the left notion came from studying patients with aphasia, or language problems stemming from brain damage. As early as 1861, a French surgeon by the name of Pierre-Paul Broca, 1824 through 1880, encountered 2 patients who had, for all practical purposes, lost the ability to talk. One of the patients could only say the word tan, and the other had an oral vocabulary of 5 words. Later, when Broca performed autopsies on the men, he found that both had sustained damage to the right side. Later, when Broca performed autopsies on the men, he found that both had sustained damage to the same area on the side of the left frontal lobe, right around the temple. Figure 2.7. Over the years, Broca identified several other speech-impaired patients with damage to the same area, a region now called Broca's area, which is involved in speech production. Wickens, 2015. Broca's area. Wernicke's area. Figure 2.7. Language areas of the brain. For most people, the left hemisphere controls language. Broca's area plays a critical role in language production, and Wernicke's area in language comprehension. Around the same time Broca was doing his research, a German doctor named Karl Wernicke, 1848 through 1905, pinpointed a different place in the left hemisphere that seemed to control speech comprehension. Wernicke noticed that patients with damage to a small tract of tissue in the left temporal lobe, now called Wernicke's area, Wernicke's area, struggled to make sense of what others were saying. Wernicke's area is the brain's headquarters for language comprehension. Wickens, 2015. The work of Broca, Wernicke, and other early researchers highlighted the left hemisphere's critical role in language. Scientists initially suspected that Broca's area was responsible for speech creation and Wernicke's area for comprehension. But it is now clear that the use of language is far more complicated. Berwick, ETAL 2013, Friedrich, ETAL 2019. These areas may perform additional functions such as processing music and interpreting hand gestures. Schlag 2015, Sue, ETAL 2009, and they cooperate with multiple brain regions to allow us to produce and understand language. Tate, ETAL 2014. Furthermore, a certain degree of speech processing appears to occur in the right hemisphere, and some researchers propose that other parts of the brain may also be involved in generating speech. Alexandru, ETAL 2017, Tate, ETAL 2014. The role of the right. We know that the left hemisphere tends to dominate in language processing, but where does the right hemisphere excel? Research suggests that the right hemisphere surpasses the left when it comes to identifying mirror images and spatial relationships and mentally rotating images. Gazzaniga, 2005. This hemisphere also plays a key role in controlling where we direct attention in our immediate environments. Spagna, ETAL 2020. It is also involved in processing emotions and recognizing facial expressions. Burt and Hausman, 2019. Gaynati, 2019. Moek, ETAL 2020. A condition called prosopagnosia. A condition called prosopagnosia, or face blindness, appears to result from abnormalities in the right fusiform gyrus. Someone with prosopagnosia may not be able to recognize the face of a family member or distinguish between the faces of friends and complete strangers. National Institute of Neurological Disorders and Stroke, NINDS 2003, January 20th. Christina wakes up. When Christina was wheeled out of surgery, her mother approached, grabbed hold of her right hand, and asked her to squeeze. Christina squeezed, demonstrating that she could understand and respond to language. Remember, she still had her left hemisphere. Losing the right side of her brain did come at a cost, however. We know that Christina has partial paralysis on the left side of her body. This makes sense because the right hemisphere controls movement and sensation on the left. We also know that it took Christina extra time to do her schoolwork. But if you ask Christina whether she has significant difficulty with any of the right brain tasks described earlier, her answers will be no. In addition to making the honor roll and leading the bowling team, Christina managed to get her driver's license, even though some of her doctors said she never would, and graduate from high school and college. In addition to making the honor roll and leading the bowling team, Christina managed to get her driver's license, even though some of her doctors said she never would, and she graduated from high school and college. These accomplishments are the result of Christina's steadfast determination, but also a testament to the brain's amazing ability to heal and regenerate. Neuroplasticity. LO12. Define neuroplasticity and recognize when it is evident in the brain. The brain undergoes constant alteration in response to experiences and is capable of some degree of physical adaptation and repair. Its ability to heal, grow new connections. Its ability to heal, grow new connections, and make do with what is available is a characteristic we refer to as neuroplasticity. New connections are constantly forming between neurons, and unused ones are fading away. Vast networks of neurons have the ability to reorganize in order to adapt to the environment and organisms' ever-changing needs, a quality particularly evident in the young women. After brain injuries, younger children have better outcomes than do adults. Their brains show more plasticity, although this depends somewhat on the type of injury. Johnston, 2009, Sue, ETAL, 2016. In one study, researchers removed eyes of newborn opossums and found that brain tissues normally destined to become visual processing centers took a developmental turn. Instead, they became areas that specialized in processing other types of sensory stimuli, such as sounds and touch. Carlin, ETAL, 2006. The same appears to happen in humans. Brain scans reveal that when visually impaired individuals learn to read Braille early in life, a region of the brain that normally specializes in handling visual information becomes activated. This suggests that visual processing centers are being used for another purpose, processing touch sensations. Burton, 2003. Lazuni and Lepore, 2014. Layu, ETAL, 2007. Connections. In Chapter 1, we describe the guidelines psychologists use to ensure the ethical treatment of humans and animals. In order to conduct the experiment described here, the researchers had to get pre-approval from an ethics board. The board determined that the animals would be treated humanely and that the proposed research necessitated the surgery. The plasticity of young brains is also evident among hemispherectomy patients. Kleiman, ETAL, 2019. After losing an entire left hemisphere, the primary location for language processing, speech is less severely compromised in young patients, though some impact is inevitable. The younger the person, the less disability in speech, but factors such as language, delays prior to surgery, and ongoing seizures after surgery can impact further language development. Choi, 2008, Musa, ETAL, 2013. Brain boosters. Both physical exercise and musical training support neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to change and adapt in response to experience. To maximize the brain benefits of exercise, some research suggests it is better to choose an activity that provides a cognitive challenge, not just a physical one. Rachelin and Alexander, 2020. For example, learning a Zumba routine might provide more cognitive stimulation than running on a treadmill. As for music, you don't have to perform on a stage to reap the benefits. Learning and practicing an instrument at home is enough. What is unique about music training is its capacity to induce neuroplastic changes in all areas of the brain. Isbicki, 2020, Para 2. Stem cells. Scientists once thought that people were born with all the neurons they would ever have. Brain cells might die, but no new ones would crop up to replace them. Thanks to research beginning in the 1990s, that dismissal notion has been turned on its head. Saylor et al. 2017. In the last several decades, studies with animals and humans have shown that some areas of the brain are capable of generating new neurons, a process known as neurogenesis. Erickson et al. 1998. Gould et al. 1999. This formation of new neurons might be tied to learning and creating memories. Jerkowski et al. 2020. Evidence suggests that neurogenesis occurs in the hippocampus during childhood. Sorrells et al. 2018. And into adulthood. Moreno Jimenez et al. 2019. Tobin et al. 2019. The cells responsible for churning out new neurons are known as stem cells, and they are quite a hot topic in biomedical research. Scientists hope to harness these little cell factories to repair tissue that has been damaged or destroyed. Imagine you could use stem cells to bring back all the neurons Brandon lost from his injury, or replace those Christina lost to surgery. Researchers have been exploring stem cell therapies for survivors of traumatic brain injury, but large randomized controlled trials are needed to better understand which treatments are safest and most effective. Zhu et al. 2019. Repairing brain tissue is just one potential application of stem cell science. These cellular cure-alls might also be used to alleviate the symptoms of Parkinson's disease or replenish neurons of the spine, enabling people with spinal cord injuries to regain movement. Both have already been accomplished in rodents, and clinical trials are underway for similar therapies in humans. Kierstead et al. 2005, Parmar et al. 2020, Tsuji et al. 2019, Wernig et al. 2008. Various types of stem cells are being investigated as treatments targeting the nervous system. Among these are neural stem cells, which generate new neurons, embryonic stem cells, which can give rise to virtually any type of cell found in the body, and induced pluripotent stem cells, which are engineered to behave like embryonic stem cells. Cyranowski, 2018, Song et al. 2018. The cortex, a peak beneath the skull. Imagine you were one of the surgeons performing Christina's hemispherectomy. What exactly would you observe when you peeled away the scalp and cut an opening into the skull? Before encountering the brain, you would come upon a layer of 3 thin membranes, the meninges, which envelope and protect the brain and spinal cord. Infographic 2.4. Perhaps you have heard of meningitis, a potentially life-threatening condition in which the meninges become inflamed as a result of an infection. The meninges are bathed in a clear, watery substance called cerebrospinal fluid, which offers additional cushioning and facilitates the transport of nutrients and waste into and out of the brain and the spinal cord. Once you peeled back the meninges, you would behold the pink cerebrum. Infographic 2.4, Getting into the Brain. Finding personality in the brain. In 1848, an accidental blast drove a 3-foot iron bar through the head of a railroad worker, Phineas Gage. He survived, but his personality was markedly changed. Previously described as having a well-balanced mind, post-injury, Gage was prone to angry outbursts and profanity. Harlow 1868-1869, as cited in Macmillan 2000. Using measurements from his fractured skull, scientists have been able to estimate where the damage occurred. Retailleau, ETAL 2004, Van Horn, ETAL 2012. Cases like this have helped psychologists understand the role of different structures in the brain. Getting to the brain. The skull, the scalp, meninges, cortex. In order to study the brain, we must get to it first. Peel away the scalp and cut away the bony skull, and you will find still more layers of protection. 3 thin membranes, the meninges, provide a barrier to both physical injury and infection. Bypass them, and the outermost layer of the brain, the cortex, is revealed. Frontal lobe. Higher level cognitive activities like language, emotions, and decision making. Partial lobe. Integration of sensory information like touch and temperature. Temporal lobe. Hearing and language comprehension. Occipital lobe. Processing of visual formation. Lobes of the brain. This drawing shows the left hemisphere of the brain. Each hemisphere is divided into lobes, which are associated with certain functions. Motor cortex commands the body's movements. Somatosensory cortex receives sensory information from the body. Wernicke's area, language comprehension. Broca's area, language production. Specialized area of the brain, unlike the lobes, which are associated with many functions. Some areas of the brain have one specialized function. Extended description for infographic 2.4, Getting into the Brain. As Christina surgeon, your main task would be to remove part of the cerebrum's outermost layer. The cerebral cortex is responsible for higher mental functions, such as decision-making, language, and processing visual information. Remember our earlier comment that the cerebrum looks like a wrinkled walnut. This is because the cortex, which surrounds nearly all the other brain structures, is scrunched up and folded onto itself to fit inside a small space, the skull. LO13. Identify the lobes of the cortex and explain their functions. The cortex overlying each hemisphere is separated into different sections, or lobes. Infographic 2.4. The frontal lobes direct higher level cognitive activities such as language, emotions, control of social behavior, and decision making. The parietal lobes, parietal, parietal, the parietal lobes receive and process sensory information like touch, pressure, temperature, and spatial orientation. Visual information goes to the occipital lobes for processing, and hearing and language comprehension are largely handled by the temporal lobes. We'll have more to say about the lobes as we discuss each in turn below. Table 2.2. The lobes, up close and personal. Prior to her hemispherectomy, Christina was extroverted, easygoing, and full of energy. I had absolutely no worries, she says, recalling her pre-Rasmussen's days. After her operation, Christina became more introverted and passive. She felt more emotionally unsettled. You go into surgery one person, she says, and you come out another. The transformation of Christina's personality may be a result of many factors, including the stress of dealing with a serious disease, undergoing a major surgery, and readjusting to life with disabilities. But it could also have something to do with the fact that she lost a considerable amount of brain tissue, including her right frontal lobe. Networks of neurons in the frontal lobes are involved in processing emotions, making plans, controlling impulses, and carrying out a vast array of mental tasks that each person does in a unique way. Alexander and Brown, 2018, Miller and Cummings, 2018, the frontal lobes play a key role in the development of personality and many of its characteristics. Barash, ETAL 2022, Forbes, ETAL 2014, Williams, ETAL 2010. A striking illustration of this phenomenon involves an unlucky railroad foreman, Finis Gage. Finis Gage and the frontal lobes. The year was 1848, and Finis Gage was working on the railroad. An accidental explosion sent a 3-foot-long iron tamping rod clear through his frontal lobe. Infographic 2.4. The rod, about as thick as a broom handle, drove straight into Gage's left cheek, through his brain, and out of the top of his skull. Macmillan, 2000. What's peculiar about Gage's accident, besides the fact that he was walking and talking just hours later, is the extreme transformation it caused. Before the accident, Gage was a well-balanced, diligent worker whom supervisors refer to as their most efficient and capable foreman. Harlow, 1848, as cited in Nayland, 1999, page 280. After the accident, he was unreliable, unpleasant, and downright vulgar. His character was so altered that people acquainted with him before and after the accident claimed he was no longer Gage. Harlow, 1848, as cited in Nayland, 1999, page 280. However, there is evidence that Gage recovered to some degree, another illustration of the brain's remarkable neuroplasticity. Griggs, 2015a. After the accident, he spent years working as a horse caretaker and stagecoach driver in Chile. Harlow, 1868-1869, as cited in Macmillan, 2000, where his colleague observed no impairment of mental faculties. Benjamin, ETAL 2018, page 280. Gage died 12 and a half years after the accident, apparently from a seizure. Benjamin ETAL 2018. Modern scientists have revisited Gage's case using measurements from his fractured skull and brain imaging data to estimate exactly where the damage occurred. Their studies suggest that the metal rod caused destruction in both the left and right frontal lobes. Damasio ETAL 1994. Although later researchers believe the rod did not pierce the right hemisphere, Ratayu ETAL 2004, Van Horn ETAL 2012. The only good thing about Gage's horrible accident, it seems, is that it illuminated the importance of the frontal lobes in defining personality characteristics. It also highlighted how adults can survive serious injury to their frontal lobes. Benjamin ETAL 2018. Dogs, cartoons, and motor cortex. Toward the rear of the frontal lobes is a strip of the brain known as the motor cortex, which works with other areas to plan and execute voluntary movements. Infographic 2.4. Evidence for this region's involvement in muscle movement first came from a study of dogs by Gustav Fritsch, 1838 through 1927, and Edward Hitzig, 1838 through 1907. Working from a makeshift lab, these two German doctors discovered they could make the animals move by electrically stimulating their brains. Gross, 2007. A mild shock to the right side of the cortex might cause a twitch in the left forepaw or the left side of the face, whereas stimulating the left would spur movement on the right. Finger, 2001, Wickens, 2015. North American neurosurgeon Wilder Penfield, 1891 through 1976, conducted research on the brains of humans using a method similar to that of Fritsch and Hitzig. He created a map showing which points along the motor cortex correspond to the various parts of the body. Penfield and Boldre, 1937. Penfield's map is often represented by the homunculus, Latin for little man, cartoon, a distorted image of a human being with huge lips and hands and a tiny torso. Figure 2.8. The size of each body part in the figure roughly reflects the amount of cortex devoted to it. This explains why parts requiring extremely fine-tuned motor control, the mouth and hands, are gigantic in comparison to other body parts. Extended description for Figure 2.8, the motor and somatosensory cortex. Figure 2.8, the motor and somatosensory cortex. The illustration shows how areas on the motor and somatosensory cortex correspond to the various regions of the body. Parts of the body that are shown larger, such as the face and hands, indicate areas of greater motor control or sensitivity. The size of each body part reflects the amount of cortex allocated to it. Albert Einstein and the parietal lobes. Directly behind the frontal lobes on the crown of your head are the parietal lobes. Infographic 2.4. The parietal lobes help orient the body in space, are involved in tactile processing, for example, interpreting sensations related to touch, such as pain and pressure. and may play a role in mathematical reasoning associated with spatial cognition. Desco, ETAL 2011, Grabner, ETAL 2007, Wolpert, ETAL 1998. One study compared the brain of Albert Einstein to a control group of 35 brain specimens from men who had donated their bodies for use in research. Prior to their deaths, these men had typical cognitive functioning, average intelligence, and no mental health issues. Research connections. In Chapter 1, we discussed the importance of having a representative sample and the potential problems with using case studies to make generalizations about the population. Comparing Einstein, a single participant, to the control group could be considered a type of case study and may be problematic. The researchers reported that Einstein's brain did not exceed the average brain weight of the control group, but a region of his parietal lobe believed to be important for visual spatial processing was 15% larger. The researchers reported that Einstein's brain did not exceed the average brain weight of the control group, but a region of his parietal lobe believed to be important for visual spatial processing was 15% larger. They proposed that the differences in that specific region of Einstein's parietal lobes may have been linked to his exceptional intellect in areas of visual spatial cognition and mathematical thinking. Weidelson, ETAL 1999. Of course, the link between the size of Einstein's parietal region and his exceptional intellect is correlational. So we should be cautious in our interpretations. Did Einstein's unusual brain structure lead to his exceptional math abilities? Or did all of his math-related thinking cause differences in his brain? We are also left to wonder how Einstein's other experiences molded the structure of his brain. For example, his long history playing the violin may have contributed to a large knob-shaped fold in the part of his cortex responsible for movement of his left hand. Chen, ETAL 2014. Superbrain. Irregularities in Albert Einstein's parietal lobes may explain some of his spectacular mathematical and visual spatial abilities. Falk, ETAL 2013. Weidelson, ETAL 1999. Could it be that Einstein's mathematical activities caused changes to his parietal lobes? Penfield and the somatosensory cortex. The parietal lobes are home to the somatosensory cortex, a strip of brain running parallel to the motor cortex, which receives and integrates sensory information from all over the body, pain and temperature, for example. Penfield, the neurosurgeon who collected data on the motor cortex, mapped the somatosensory cortex in the same way. Penfield and Boldre, 1937. Figure 2.8. As you might expect, the most sensitive areas of the body, like the face and tongue, are oversized on the homunculus, whereas areas less sensitive to stimulation, such as the forearm and the calf, are smaller. The temporal lobes and the auditory cortex. Below the parietal lobes, on the sides of your head, are the temporal lobes, which process auditory stimuli. This area of the brain also plays an important role in language comprehension and face recognition. Boos, ETAL 2022, Bronsdorf, ETAL 2021. The temporal lobes are home to the auditory cortex, which receives information from the ears and allows us to hear sounds. Studies of primate vocalizations suggest that the ability to recognize language
has evolved over time and is processed within the temporal lobes. Scott ETAL 2000, Squire ETAL 2004. The occipital lobes and the primary visual cortex. The occipital lobes and the primary visual cortex. Visual information is initially processed in the occipital lobes in the lower back of the head. If you have ever suffered a blow to the rear of your head, you may remember seeing stars for a few seconds, probably because activity in the occipital lobes was disrupted. It is here where the optic nerve connects to the primary visual cortex that visual information is received, interpreted, and processed, for example, about color, shape, and motion. Refer to the Sensation and Perception chapter for more on the visual process. Damage to this area may cause severe visual impairment, even in a person with healthy eyes. Yet, such an individual would still be able to see vivid mental images. Bridge ETAL 2012. LO14, describe the association areas and identify their functions. The association areas. In addition to the different lobes described above, the cortex contains association areas whose role is to integrate information from all over the brain. The association areas are located in all four lobes. However, they are much harder to pinpoint than the motor and sensory areas. These areas allow us to learn, just as you're doing now, to have abstract thoughts, for example, 2 plus 2 equals 4, and to carry out complex behaviors like creating stories on Instagram. The language processing hubs we learned about earlier, Broca's area and Wernicke's area, are association areas that play a role in the production and comprehension of speech. In humans, the vast majority of the brain's cortex is dedicated to the association areas. Table 2.2, Regions of the Cortex. Structure and function and importance. Structure, association areas. Its function and importance is integrate information from the structure is association areas. The function and importance is it integrates information from all over the brain. It allows us to learn, have abstract thoughts, and carry out complex behaviors. The structure is Broca's area. Its function and importance is it's involved in speech production, helps us generate speech. Structure, corpus callosum. Function and importance, connects the hemispheres, allows the left and right sides of the brain to communicate and work together to process information. Structure, frontal lobes. Function and importance, process higher level cognitive activities such as language, emotions, control of social behavior, and decision making. Structure, left cerebral hemisphere. Function and importance, controls the right side of the body, excels in language processing. Structure, motor cortex. Motor cortex, function and importance, plans and executes voluntary movements, allows us to move our body. Structure, occipital lobes, function and importance, process visual information, help us see. Parietal lobes, receive and process sensory information, orient the body in space. Primary visual cortex, receives and interprets visual information,
allows us to see vivid mental images. Right cerebral hemisphere controls the left side of the body, excels in visual spatial tasks. Somatosensory cortex receives and integrates sensory information from the body. For example, helps us determine if touch is pleasurable or painful. Temporal lobes play a key role in hearing, language comprehension, and memory, process auditory stimuli, recognizes visual objects. Wernicke's area plays a key role in language comprehension, enables us to make sense of what is being said. The cortex, or outermost layer of the brain, can be divided into functionally significant areas. This table summarizes the areas of the cortex and their importance. Think critically. A magical number, 150. A major theme of this chapter is localization of function, the idea that certain areas of the brain tend to specialize in performing certain tasks. When we say tasks, we mean just about any activity you can imagine, from making a sandwich to managing friend networks on social media. Whether you're on social media or interacting in person, making connections and emphasizing whether you're on social media or interacting in person, making connections and empathizing with other people rely on a system of neurons some refer to as social brain network. Falk and Platt, 2018. But how many meaningful social ties can your brain actually sustain? According to the social brain hypotheses, humans can handle a maximum of about 150 coherent personal relationships at any point in time. Sue, ETAL, 2005, page 439. This upper limit was originally meant to capture the number of offline relationships, but it seems to apply to online relationships as well. Bisdock and Dunbar, 2020. Dunbar, 1993. To summarize, you can only have about 150 real friends at a time on social media or in person. Beyond that number, your friends are more like acquaintances. Show what you know. Question number 1. The left hemisphere excels in language and the right hemisphere excels in visual spatial tasks. This specialization of the two hemispheres is known as A. Split brain, B. Homunculus, C. Hemispherectomy, D. Lateralization. The answer is D. Lateralization. The left hemisphere excels in language and the right hemisphere excels in visual spatial tasks. This specialization of the two hemispheres is known as lateralization. Question number 2. A man involved in a car accident experienced severe brain trauma. Following the accident, he had difficulty producing speech, even though he could understand what people were saying. It is very likely he had experienced damage to the left frontal lobe in a part of the brain referred to as A. Wernicke's area, B. Broca's area, C. the visual field, D. the corpus callosum. The answer is B. Broca's area. A man involved in a car accident experienced severe brain trauma. Following the accident, he had difficulty producing speech, even though he could understand what people were saying. It is very likely he had experienced damage to the left frontal lobe in a part of the brain referred to as Broca's area. 3. The brain is constantly undergoing alterations in response to experiences and is capable of a certain degree of physical adaptation and repair. This ability is known as A. Neuroplasticity, B. Phrenology, C. Ablation, D. Lateralization. The answer is A, neuroplasticity. The brain is constantly undergoing alterations in response to experiences and is capable of a certain degree of physical adaptation and repair. This ability is known as neuroplasticity. Question number 4. How do the two brain hemispheres communicate? How does this change after a split brain operation? The corpus callosum is a bundle of nerve fibers that allows the two halves of the brain to communicate and work together to process information. For example, with visual information, each eye receives visual sensations, but that information is sent to the opposite hemisphere and shared between the hemispheres via the corpus callosum. Specifically, information presented in the right visual field is processed in the left hemisphere, and information presented in the left visual field is processed in the right hemisphere. Because the hemispheres are disconnected through the surgery, researchers can study each hemisphere separately to explore its own unique capabilities. 4 specializations. Researchers can study each hemisphere separately to explore its own unique capabilities or specializations. In a split brain individual, communication between the hemisphere is limited. In a split brain individual, communication between the hemispheres is limited. Question number 5. The blank are regions of the cortex that integrate information from all over the brain, allowing us to learn, have abstract thoughts, and carry out complex behaviors. The answer is association areas. The association areas are regions of the cortex that integrate information from all over the brain, allowing us to learn, have abstract thoughts, and carry out complex behaviors. Question number 6. Briefly describe the lobes of the cortex and their associated functions. The frontal lobes direct higher-level cognitive activities such as language, emotions, control of social behavior, and decision-making. The occipital lobes process visual information and help us see. The parietal lobes receive and process sensory information and orient the body in space. The temporal lobes are instrumental in the comprehension of hearing and language. They process auditory stimuli, recognize visual objects, and play a key role in language comprehension and memory.
Let's dig a little deeper. Now that we have surveyed the brain's outer terrain, identifying some of the hotspots for language and other higher cognitive functions, let's dig deeper and examine some of its inner structures. Drama Central, the limbic system, LO15, distinguish the structures and functions of the limbic system. Buried beneath the cortex is the limbic system, a group of interconnected structures that play an important role in our experiences of emotion, motivation, and memory. It also fuels our most basic drives such as hunger, sex, and aggression. The limbic system includes the thalamus, hypothalamus, amygdala, and hippocampus. Hypothalamus, thalamus, amygdala, hippocampus. Figure 2.9 of the limbic system. The limbic system, which includes the thalamus, hypothalamus, amygdala, and hippocampus, fuels basic drives and processes emotions and memories. Thalamus, seated at the center of the limbic system, is the thalamus,
whose job is to process and relay sensory information to the appropriate parts of the cortex, visual information to the visual cortex, for example. The great majority of data picked up by all the sensory systems, except olfaction, sense of smell, pass through the thalamus before moving on to the cortex for processing. Mitchell et al. 2014. You might think of the thalamus as an air traffic control tower guiding incoming aircraft. When pilots communicate with the tower, the controllers direct their routes or tell them what runway to use. Hypothalamus. Just before the thalamus is the hypothalamus. Hypo means under in Greek, which keeps the body's system in a steady state, making sure variables like blood pressure, body temperature, and fluid and electrolyte balance remain within a healthy range. Just below the thalamus is the hypothalamus. Hypo means under in Greek, which keeps the body's system in a steady state, making sure variables like blood pressure, body temperature, and fluid and electrolyte balance remain within a healthy range. Hypothalamus. Just below the thalamus is the hypothalamus. Hypo means under in Greek, which keeps the body's systems in a steady state, making sure variables like blood pressure, body temperature, and fluid electrolyte balance remain within a healthy range. During emergencies, the hypothalamus and endocrine system work together to help us cope with perceived threats. Stress and health chapter. The hypothalamus is also involved in regulating sleep-wake cycles. Sapper et al. 2005, Sue et al. 2015. Sexual arousal and appetite, Hurley and Johnson 2014. For example, neurons from the digestive system send signals to the hypothalamus, the stomach is empty, which then sends signals to higher regions of the brain. It's time to eat. But deciding what and when to eat does not always come down to being hungry or full. Other brain areas are involved in eating decisions and can override the hypothalamus, driving you to polish off the French fries or scarf down that chocolate bar even when you are not that hungry. Amygdala. Another structure of the limbic system is the amygdala, which processes aggression and basic emotions such as fear, along with the memories associated with them. Janek and Tai, 2015, Kluver and Busi, 1939. Having spent many months in a war zone, Brandon encountered more than his fair share of fear-provoking experiences. On one occasion, he was riding at nearly 60 miles per hour in a Humvee that spun out of control and almost flipped over. My heart was beating faster than ever before, Brandon recalls. In dangerous situations like this, the amygdala is activated and the nervous system orchestrates a whole body response, racing heart, sweaty palms, and the like, as well as an emotional reaction, fear. Life-threatening situations arise not only in war, they occasionally occur Life-threatening situations arise not only in war, they occasionally occur in everyday life. When faced with a potentially dangerous scenario, the brain must determine whether a real threat exists.
In such cases, the amygdala shares information with areas in the frontal lobes to make this assessment. Lichtig, ETAL 2014, Senga, ETAL 2020. Once a situation is deemed safe, the frontal lobes give the amygdala an all-clear signal and fear diminishes. Like many parts of the nervous system, the amygdala has structural divisions that seem to play different roles. In assessing the threat of a situation, some structures come into play immediately, resulting in reflexive behavior, while others react slightly later as attention is focused on the threat, resulting in voluntary behavior. The speed of our fear reactions depends on these type of dual routes. D. Gelder, ETAL 2012. Motivation and Emotion chapter. The amygdala also helps us to perceive and experience a wide range of positive emotions, with processing speed depending on the intensity of the emotion. Bonnet, ETAL 2015. Hippocampus. Right near the amygdala is a pair of seahorse-shaped structures called the hippocampus. The hippocampus is primarily responsible for processing and forming new memories from experiences. The hippocampus is primarily responsible for processing and forming new memories from experiences, but it may not be where memories are permanently stored. Memory chapter, Ali 2020. Eichenbaum 2004. Given its key role in memory, it may come as no surprise that the hippocampus is one of the brain areas affected by Alzheimer's disease. HSU ETAL 2015, Moreno Jimenez ETAL 2019. On the brighter side of things, the hippocampus is also one of the few places in the brain known to generate new neurons. Erickson ETAL 1998, Tate ETAL 2014. However, some research questions the extent to which this neurogenesis occurs in adulthood and how it impacts behavior. Kemperman ETAL 2018. However, some research questions the extent to which this neurogenesis occurs in adulthood and how it impacts behavior. Kemperman ETAL 2018. Given the special role of the hippocampus, you would be wise to take good care of it. But how? One simple way might be changing your diet. According to one study, eating large amounts of simple carbs and sugar may be associated with reduced hippocampal size and decreased memory function. Reyes, 2014. The brain seems to benefit from a diet that is highly plant-based or rich in fruits, vegetables, nuts, whole grains, and legumes, such as peas, lentils, and beans, and low in saturated fat and red meat. This Mediterranean diet, which also features olive oil and fish, has been correlated with lower rates of cognitive deterioration and decreased Alzheimer's risk. Hardman ETAL 2016. Keenan ETAL 2020. National Institute on Aging 2023. Table 2.3 describes specific foods linked to better brain health. Table 2.3 Food for Thought. Food, potential benefits. Walnuts. Walnuts contain chemical compounds that may reduce inflammation in the brain. ROS ETAL 2018. Eating walnuts has been associated with enhanced verbal reasoning and better learning, recall, and processing speed. Audiobook and ANG 2015. Priebus ETAL 2012. Berries. Like many fruits and vegetables, berries contain chemicals that reduce inflammation and limit the activity of cell-damaging free radicals. Sticks 2020. White ETAL 2019. Eating blueberries, strawberries, and other berries has been linked to better cognitive function. Yi ETAL 2021. White ETAL 2019. Dark chocolate and cocoa. Like many plant foods, cocoa beans contain flavonoids, which may have neuroprotective effects in areas of the brain important to memory and learning. SOCI ETAL 2017. Cocoa flavonoids appear to promote blood flow in the dentate gyrus, part of the hippocampus, which may enhance memory. Lamport ETAL 2020. SOCI ETAL 2017. Oily fish. Oily fish such as salmon, lake trout, sardines, and albacore tuna are part. Oily fish such as salmon, lake trout, sardines, and albacore tuna are packed with omega-3 fatty acids, which play an important role in maintaining brain structure and function with advancing age. Patala ETAL 2014, page 435. Preliminary evidence suggests that omega-3 intake may help prevent cognitive decline in people at risk for dementia. Vemuri ETAL 2019. Green leafy vegetables. Just one daily serving of green leafy vegetables, like for example kale, spinach, or collards, may protect against age-related cognitive decline. These veggies contain lutein, folate, and other nutrients that seem to benefit brain health. Morris ETAL 2018. Here are just a handful of many foods that may promote brain health. If you have an allergy or any other medical condition, check with your doctor before adding new foods to your diet. What roles do the brainstem and cerebellum play? The brain contains structures responsible for complex processes such as rebuilding a car's engine and selecting the right classes for a degree program. But delve deep and you will find areas associated with more basic functions. LO16 distinguish the structures and functions of the brainstem and cerebellum. Components of the brainstem. The brain's core consists of a stalk-like trio of structures called the brainstem, figure 2.10. The brainstem, which includes the midbrain, pons, and medulla, extends from the spinal cord to the forebrain. The forebrain is the biggest part of the brain and includes the structures we have already discussed, including the cerebrum and the limbic system, NINDS 2023, March 17th. Midbrain, reticular formation. Hindbrain, pons, cerebellum, medulla. Figure 2.0, the brainstem and Figure 2.10, the brainstem and cerebellum. Located beneath the structures of the limbic system, the brainstem includes the midbrain, pons, and medulla. These structures are involved in arousal, movement, and life-sustaining processes. The cerebellum is important for muscle coordination and balance, and when paired with the pons and medulla, makes up the hindbrain. The top portion of the brainstem is known as the midbrain, and although there is some disagreement about which brain structures belong to the midbrain, most agree it plays a role in arousal. The midbrain is also home to neurons that help generate movement patterns in response to sensory input. Stein, et al. 2009. For example, if someone shouted, "Look out," neurons in your midbrain would play a role when you flinched. Also, located in the midbrain is part of the reticular formation, an intricate web of neurons that is responsible for levels of arousal, whether you are awake, dozing off, or somewhere in between. The reticular formation helps you selectively attend to important information and ignore what's irrelevant. By sifting through sensory data on its way to the cortex, imagine how overwhelmed you would feel by all the sights, sounds, tastes, smells, and physical sensations in your environment if you didn't have a reticular formation to help you discriminate between information that is important, the sound of a honking car horn, and that which is trivial, the sound of a dog barking in the distance. The hindbrain includes the pons, medulla, and cerebellum, areas of the brain responsible for fundamental life-sustaining processes. The pons helps regulate respiration and sleep-wake cycles and coordinates movement between the right and left sides of the body. It sits atop the medulla, a structure that oversees some of the body's most vital functions, including breathing and heart rate maintenance. Broad belt, et al. 2010. Behind the brainstem, just above the nape of the neck, sits the orange-sized cerebellum, Latin for little brain. The cerebellum looks like a mini version of the whole brain. Centuries ago, scientists found that removing parts of the cerebellum from animals caused them to stagger, fall, and act clumsy. Although the cerebellum is best known for its importance in muscle coordination and balance, researchers are exploring how this little brain influences higher cognitive processes in the big brain, such as controlling emotions and processing language. Kwan, 2019, Marianne, et al. 2014. People with damaged cerebellums struggle with certain fine distinctions, such as telling the difference between words that sound somewhat alike, for example, pause versus pause, or producing emotional reactions that are appropriate for a given situation. Bauer and Parsons, 2003, Lupo, et al., 2015. The cerebellum and other structures located below the cortex are summarized in Table 2.4. Table 2.4, below the cortex, structures to know. Table 2.4, below the cortex, structures to know. Structure, limbic system, function and importance, group of interconnected structures that play a role in our experiences of emotion, motivation, and memory, fuels basic drives such as hunger, sex, and aggression. Structure, thalamus, function and importance, processes and relays sensory information to the cortex. Structure, hypothalamus, function and importance, keeps the body's systems in a steady state. Structure, amygdala, function and importance, processes aggression and basic emotions like fear, along with the memories associated with them. Structure, hippocampus, function and importance, primarily responsible for processing and forming new memories from experiences. Structure, midbrain, function and importance, plays a role in levels of arousal, home to neurons that help generate movement patterns in response to sensory input. Structure: reticular formation, function and importance, responsible for levels of arousal and our ability to selectively attend to important incoming sensory data. Hindbrain, responsible for fundamental life-sustaining processes. Pons helps regulate sleep, wake cycles, and coordinate movement between the right and left sides of the body. Medulla oversees functions such as breathing and heart rate. Cerebellum, involved in muscle coordination and balance. Tucked below the cortex are brain structures with a variety of different functions. Make sure you are familiar with these key regions. Put your heads together. At this point, you understand how hard your brain works 24/7, often in ways beyond your awareness. In your group, A, choose an important activity that would like choose an important activity that you would like to examine. For example, giving a presentation in class, going on a first date, and discuss how specific structures of the B, limbic system, C, brainstem, and D, cerebellum may be involved. Show what you know. 1. The specific brain structure that processes aggression and basic emotions like fear, along with memories associated with them, is the amygdala. Question number 2. The structure located behind the brainstem that is responsible for muscle coordination and balance is the cerebellum. Question number 3. The primary role of the thalamus is to A, relay sensory information, B, keep the body's systems in a steady state, C, generate movement patterns in response to sensory input, or D, regulate sleep and wake cycles. The answer is A, relay sensory information. The primary role of the thalamus is to relay sensory information. Where are they now? You may be wondering what became of Brandon Burns and Christina Sandhouse. 3 years after returning from Iraq, Brandon married a woman named Laura, who has witnessed his dramatic recovery. When Laura first met Brandon, he had a lot of trouble communicating his thoughts. His sentences were choppy, he often omitted words, and spoke in a flat and emotionless tone. His speech was very delayed, very slow, Laura recalls. Now he is able to use more humor and emotion, articulate his thoughts in lengthy, complex sentences, and read books. In addition to raising his children, Brandon has worked in a church ministry and in that capacity has traveled to numerous countries including Haiti, Kenya, and Honduras. Life is good. 3 years after his traumatic brain injury, Brandon celebrated his marriage to Laura. Hard at work. For over a decade, Christina has been working as a speech-language pathologist in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, helping children For over a decade, Christina has been working as a speech-language pathologist in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, helping children overcome speech difficulties. As for Christina, she continues to reach for the stars and grab them. After studying speech-language pathology at Misericordia University in Dallas, Pennsylvania for 5 years and making the dean's list nearly every semester, Christina graduated with both a bachelor's and a master's degree. But those years were not smooth sailing. Christina remembers the department chairman telling her that she wouldn't be able to handle the rigors of the program. According to Christina, on graduation day, the same chairman presented her with the department's Outstanding Achievement Award. People often don't expect too much from people with disabilities, she says. Today, Christina is married with 2 daughters and works as a speech-language pathologist, helping school children overcome their difficulties with stuttering, articulation, and other speech problems. Hopefully, I have opened some doors for other people with disabilities, Christina offers. There were never doors open for me. I've had to bang them down. Let their stories inspire you. Brandon and Christina provide breathtaking illustrations of neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to heal, grow new connections, and make do with what is available. These amazing changes can occur under a variety of circumstances. After a stroke, in the face of blindness, and even in response to a regular exercise routine, El Sayes, ETAL 2019, Hassan, ETAL 2016, Mujtabavi, ETAL 2022. Your brain can change too. Every time you acquire knowledge or learn a new skill, whether it's cooking pad thai or plucking out melodies on a guitar, new networks of communication are sprouting between your neurons. Bars, ETAL 2016, Vaquero, ETAL 2016. Expose yourself to new information and activities, and your brain will continue to develop and adapt. There is no limit to what you can learn. The recoveries of Brandon and Christina also highlight the importance of maintaining hope, even in the face of daunting obstacles. Abel, ETAL 2016, Brady, ETAL 2016. There were many times Brandon and Christina could have given up and wallowed in self-pity, but instead they decided to fight. So too did the neuropsychologists, physical therapists, occupational therapists, speech pathologists, and other professionals who assisted in their rehabilitation. The triumphs of Brandon and Christina bear testimony to the awesome tenacity of the human spirit. Video profile Christina, you asked, they answered. Chapter 2 Review Summary of Concepts. LO1 Define neuroscience and biological psychology and explain how they contribute to our understanding of behavior. Neuroscience is the study of the brain and other parts of the nervous system, and it overlaps with a variety of disciplines and research areas. Biological psychology is a subfield of psychology focusing on how the brain and other biological systems influence behavior. LO2 Compare and contrast tools scientists use to study the brain. Researchers use a variety of technologies to study the brain. An electroencephalogram EEG detects electrical impulses in the brain. Computed tomography CT uses X-rays to create many cross-sectional images of the brain. Magnetic resonance imaging MRI produces more detailed cross-sectional images with the help of magnetic fields. Both MRI and CT scans only reveal the structure of the brain. Positron emission tomography PET uses radioactivity to track glucose consumption to construct an image of the brain. Functional magnetic resonance imaging fMRI captures changes in brain activity by tracking patterns of blood flow. LO3 Label the parts of a neuron and describe an action potential. A typical neuron has three basic parts: a cell body, dendrites, and an axon. A typical neuron has three basic parts: a cell body, dendrites, and an axon. The dendrites receive messages from other neurons, and branches at the end of the axon terminals, deliver messages to neighboring neurons. These messages are electrical and chemical in nature. An action potential is the electrical signal that moves down the axon, causing a neuron to send chemical messages across the synapse. Action potentials are all or none, meaning they either occur or they don't occur. LO4 Illustrate how neurons communicate with each other. Neurons communicate with each other via chemicals called neurotransmitters. An action potential moves down the axon to the axon terminal where neurotransmitters are released. Most of the neurotransmitters released into the synapse drift across the gap and come into contact with receptor sites of the receiving neuron's dendrites. LO5 Identify specific neurotransmitters and summarize how their activity affects human behavior. Neurotransmitters are chemical messengers that neurons use to communicate. There are many types of neurotransmitters, including acetylcholine, glutamate, GABA, norepinephrine, serotonin, dopamine, and endorphins, and each has its own type of receptor site. Neurotransmitters can influence mood, cognition, behavior, and many other processes. LO6 Explain how the central and peripheral nervous systems connect. The brain and spinal cord make up the central nervous system, CNS, which communicates with the rest of the body through the peripheral nervous system, PNS. There are three types of neurons participating in this back and forth communication. Motor neurons carry information from the CNS to various parts of the body, including muscles and glands. Sensory neurons relay data from the sensory systems, for example, eyes and ears, to the CNS for processing, and interneurons, which reside exclusively in the CNS, act as bridges connecting sensory and motor neurons. Interneurons mediate the nervous system's most complex operations. LO7 Describe the organization and function of the peripheral nervous system. The peripheral nervous system is divided into two branches: the somatic nervous system and the autonomic nervous system. The somatic nervous system controls the skeletal muscles that enable voluntary movement. The autonomic nervous system regulates the body's involuntary processes and has two divisions: the sympathetic nervous system, which initiates the fight or flight response, and the parasympathetic nervous system, which oversees the rest and digest processes. LO8 summarize how the endocrine system influences behavior and psychological processes. Closely connected with the nervous system, the endocrine system uses glands to send messages throughout the body. These messages are conveyed by hormones, chemicals released into the bloodstream that can cause aggression and mood swings and influence growth and alertness, among other things. LO9 describe the two brain hemispheres and how they communicate. The cerebrum includes virtually all parts of the brain except for the brainstem structures. It is divided into two hemispheres, the right cerebral hemisphere and the left cerebral hemisphere. The left hemisphere controls most of the movement and sensation on the right side of the body. The right hemisphere controls most of the movement and sensation on the left side of the body. Connecting the two hemispheres is the corpus callosum, a band of nerve fibers that enables them to communicate. LO10 define lateralization and explain what the split brain experiments reveal about the right and left hemispheres. Researchers have gleaned valuable knowledge about the brain hemispheres from the experiments on split brain patients, people whose hemispheres have been surgically disconnected. Under certain experimental conditions, people who have had the split brain operation act as if they have two separate brains. By observing the brain hemispheres operating independently of one another, researchers have discovered that each hemisphere excels in certain activities, a phenomenon known as lateralization. Generally, the left hemisphere excels in language and the right hemisphere excels in visual spatial tasks. LO11 identify areas in the brain responsible for language production and comprehension. Several areas in the brain are responsible for language processing. Located on the side of the left frontal lobe is Broca's area, which is primarily responsible for speech production. Located in the left temporal lobe is the Wernicke's area, which is primarily responsible for language comprehension. LO12 define neuroplasticity and recognize when it is evident in the brain. Neuroplasticity is the ability of the brain to form new connections between neurons and adapt to changing circumstances. Networks of neurons, particularly in the young, can reorganize to adapt the environment and an organism's ever-changing needs. LO13 identify the lobes of the cortex and explain their functions. The outermost layer of the cerebrum is the cerebral cortex. The cortex is separated into different sections called lobes. The frontal lobes are responsible for higher level cognitive functions such as language, emotions, control of social behavior, and decision making. The parietal lobes receive and process sensory information such as touch, pressure, temperature, and spatial orientation. Visual information goes to the occipital lobes for processing. The temporal lobes are primarily responsible for hearing and language comprehension. LO14 describe the association areas and identify their functions. The association areas in the lobes integrate information from all over the brain, allowing us to learn, have abstract thoughts, and carry out complex behaviors. 15 distinguish the structures and functions of the limbic system. The limbic system is a group of interconnected structures that play an important role in our emotions and memories. The limbic system includes the hippocampus, amygdala, thalamus, and hypothalamus. In addition to processing emotions and memories, the limbic system fuels the most basic drives, such as hunger, sex, and aggression. LO16 distinguish the structures and functions of the brainstem and cerebellum. The brain's core consists of a stalk-like trio of structures called the brainstem, which includes the midbrain, pons, and medulla. The brainstem extends from the spinal cord to the forebrain, which is the largest part of the brain and includes the cerebral cortex and the limbic system. Located at the top of the brainstem is the midbrain, which most agree plays a role in arousal levels. The hindbrain includes areas responsible for fundamental life-sustaining processes. Behind the brainstem is the cerebellum, which is responsible for muscle coordination and balance. Key terms: action potential, adrenal glands, all or none, amygdala, association areas, autonomic nervous system, axon, biological psychology, Broca's area, cell body, central nervous system, CNS, cerebellum, cerebral cortex, cerebrum, corpus callosum, dendrites, endocrine system, forebrain, frontal lobes, glial cells, hindbrain, hippocampus, hormones, hypothalamus, interneurons, lateralization, limbic system, medulla, midbrain, motor cortex, motor neurons, myelin sheath, nerves, neurogenesis, neurons, neuroplasticity, neuroscience, neurotransmitters, occipital lobes, parasympathetic nervous system, parietal lobes, peripheral nervous system, PNS, phrenology, pituitary gland, pons, receptor sites, reflex arc, resting potential, reticular formation, reuptake, sensory neurons, somatic nervous system, somatosensory cortex, spinal cord, split brain operation, stem cells, sympathetic nervous system, synapse, temporal lobes, thalamus, thyroid gland, Wernicke's area. Chapter 3, Sensation and Perception. The time now is 11:14 p.m. Today is Friday, May 22nd, 2026. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.